Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Kathy's lawyer stood up, his voice measured and practiced. Your Honor, my client wishes to request a counseling session in an effort to repair the marriage. She believes that with the right support, this relationship can be mended. My lawyer stood immediately, his voice confident and unwavering. Your Honor, Mr. Porter has made it clear that he does not wish to reconcile. The facts of this case speak for themselves. Mrs. Porter has engaged in multiple extramarital affairs and is currently pregnant with a child fathered by one of these individuals. My client's intention is to move forward with the divorce. There was a murmur in the courtroom, whispers that seemed to echo my own disbelief at how this had unfolded. I clenched my hands together, keeping my expression neutral. I needed to stay strong. Kathy's lawyer pushed on, though there was a hint of desperation in his tone now. While my client acknowledges past mistakes, she believes that a counseling session could bring closure and understanding to both parties, possibly healing some of the damage. I felt a surge of frustration. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I appreciate the court's time, but I have no interest in counseling. Too much has happened, and this marriage is beyond saving. I just want the divorce. Kathy's lawyer glanced at his notes before addressing the judge again. Your Honor, beyond the marriage itself, there is also the welfare of the unborn child to consider. My client believes that counseling is essential for ensuring that all parties, especially the child, have a chance at stability and support. My lawyer shifted slightly but stayed silent, waiting for my cue. I couldn't keep my frustration contained any longer. I stood, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I have no interest in raising that devil spawn that isn't mine. That cheating 304 can find her father and let him raise it. I don't want to attend any counseling with that woman. Mr. Porter, one more word and I will hold you in contempt of court, he yelled at me. A quiet gasp moved through the room, and I caught a glimpse of Kathy's face, pale and tight-lipped. The judge's eyes narrowed as he looked at me over the rim of his glasses, a long pause filling the space as if he were weighing every word. Mr. Porter, the judge said, his voice firm, while I understand your feelings, this court must consider all factors, including the emotional welfare of everyone involved. I am ordering both parties to attend counseling sessions as a final attempt to address these issues constructively. I will not attend, I scowled. I am ordering 1 month of counseling, 2 sessions per week. You will attend, Mr. Porter, or else. He glowered at me for a moment, then banged his gavel again, that is all. A week later, the room was silent, tense, with an air that seemed to buzz with unspoken words. The counselor, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, sat across from us, hands resting lightly on a notepad. Kathy sat next to me, looking down, twisting the fabric of her sweater nervously. Ben, Kathy started, her voice shaky. I just want to say. Don't, I snapped, my voice cold and sharp. Keep your mouth shut. I don't want to hear anything from you. The counselor, Mr. Hensley, glanced between us, his expression neutral but attentive. Ben, I know this is tough, but we're here to try to open a dialogue. Even if it's uncomfortable, speaking up can help us move forward. Will you give it a try? I crossed my arms, my jaw tightening. I'm here because the judge ordered it, not because I want to talk. I'll attend, but I don't have to participate. A brief silence followed, Mr. Hensley's eyes searching mine for any sign of willingness. When none came, he sighed, shifting his notepad slightly. I understand this is painful, but communication is a step toward understanding, even if it doesn't lead to reconciliation. After an hour, okay doctor, good session. See you Thursday? I'm canceling the sessions and sending my report to the judge. Even better. I left the office. The judge was not pleased. Give me one reason why I should not hold your client in contempt, he growled at my lawyer. Your Honor, you ordered my client to attend the sessions. He attended the first session in accordance with the order. It was the counselor who called off the rest of the session. The counselor's report clearly states that he made no attempt to engage in the session. He put in headphones and ignored them for the entire time. The judge responded. The order was that he attend, my lawyer returned. He attended. Given that the counselor felt that there was no benefit in continuing, I would like to request that you grant the divorce according to the petition. Not on your life. The judge said, I am ordering 4 weeks of counseling. Mr. Porter will attend, and he will participate. The office was set up in exactly the same format as before when I arrived. 2 chairs about a foot apart faced the doctor's desk. He sat behind it. The desk was bare, barring a yellow legal pad and a picture of a pretty woman I would guess in her mid-30s and a child that looked about 6 years old. Mr. Porter, the doctor said, please, take a seat. Once again, I started to move the chair. Kathy put her hand out to stop me and I jumped back. If you dare to touch me, I would consider it an assault and would punch your teeth in your stomach. You understand, bitch? Kathy gasped, pulling back. I went back to moving the chair and then sat in it. Once again, I got out my phone. Mr. Porter, the judge ordered that you participate in the session. I know, I said, my voice steady. I'm using my phone to record the session to prove my participation. My lawyer mentioned that some counselors might have their own agendas. Since my soon-to-be ex-wife has already been seeing you for some time, I feel you may have developed a relationship with her that could work against me. The counselor, Mr. Hensley, tilted his head slightly. And what if I do not wish you to record the sessions? He asked, his tone calm but direct. Then I'll go back to court and request a different counselor. I replied firmly. I have that option. The only reason I didn't do that already was to avoid more delays. I just want to quickly get rid of this 304. Mr. Hensley turned his attention to Kathy, who was sitting with her arms crossed, eyes averted. Kathy, how do you feel about the sessions being recorded? She shrugged, barely looking up. Whatever, she said with a hint of impatience, waving her hand dismissively. Can we just start? The air in the room seemed to settle, a reluctant agreement hanging between us all. Okay then, Mr. Hensley said, folding his hands in front of him. What I would like to do to start. Before we start, I interrupted, my tone cold. Can I ask a question? Of course, he said, his voice measured. You can ask questions at any time. I may ask you to hold off during certain points, but right now, go ahead. He offered a small smile that I didn't return. Have you slept with her yet? I asked bluntly. Kathy gasped, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the room, but Mr. Hensley's expression didn't change. No, Ben, he said evenly, Kathy and I have not had, nor will we have, any kind of sexual contact. It would be highly inappropriate, even if I were not already very happily married. Does that answer your question? I looked at him for a long moment before nodding. I believed him, despite the fact that Kathy seemed to have been involved with nearly every man she'd encountered in the past year. All right then, Mr. Hensley continued smoothly. As I was saying, to begin, I'd like to set our expectations. Since I have already spoken to Kathy on a few occasions, I would like her to outline what she hopes to achieve in these sessions and what her desired outcome would be. Ben, I'd ask that while she's talking, you refrain from comments or questions until the end. Once Kathy has shared her goals, I'll ask you to do the same. My goal is to see her get an incurable STD and watch her die a slow and painful death, to go to her grave and piss on it. That is the ultimate dream that I have. Mr. Hensley shook his head and looked towards Kathy, who was already shaken by my response. Talk to me, Kathy, Mr. Hensley said, his tone gentle. Tell me what you would like Ben to hear. Kathy took a shaky breath, her voice wavering as she began. I want him to hear how sorry I am for hurting him. I know what I did was wrong, but it was just that he spent so much time at work and on his business trips, and I was lonely. I realize how much pain I caused him, and if I could go back and change the past, I would do anything to make it right. I love him more than anything else in the world. I know we can get past this if he'd just give me a chance. I would show him that I can be the best wife a man could ever want. We could raise this child together, give him a wonderful life, maybe even a sibling. I want us to be a family again. I know we can make it through this. Mr. Hensley offered a small nod and a faint, supportive smile. Thank you, Kathy. Now, Ben, what would you like to say? She can write down her feelings on a piece of paper, then roll it in and stick it up her butt, far enough to choke on it. Feelings mean crap to me, and she is already dead to me. Kathy started to cry and ran out of the room. Please collide with something and die, I said as she ran out. That was not helpful, Mr. Hensley remarked, his voice steady but edged with concern. I don't want to be helpful, I spat back. That lying, cheating woman slept with half the city for a year, got herself pregnant, and then tried to pass the baby off as mine. If I hadn't already been suspicious and demanded a DNA test, I'd be stuck right now paying for someone else's kid. Tell me, doctor, how exactly should I be acting? It's natural to be angry, Ben, Mr. Hensley replied evenly, but you need to look past the anger to remember what you shared. I glared at him, my rage simmering. Do you even know what the hell you're talking about? I snapped. Have you ever had the love of your life, the person you trusted with every piece of yourself, who you die to protect, betray you so completely that you question your own sanity? How can someone who says they love you hurt you so deeply that it pushes you to the brink of wanting to end it all? And did you notice she hasn't even once truly apologized for what she did? Not for screwing all those men, Not for the endless lies. Not for getting herself pregnant and not even knowing who the father is. The only thing certain is that it wasn't the person who should have been giving her a child. Me. So don't sit there with your sanctimonious, and your book knowledge, telling me I need to move past my anger. Right now, my anger is the only thing keeping me going. Just let me get this cheating 304 out of my life, so I can try to rebuild from the wreckage she left behind. I stood up, eyes locked on Mr. Hensley. Does that count as participation? I snarled as I turned and walked out. I asked Kathy to allow us to have this session without her. Mr. Hensley said as I walked into his office the following week. I think we may be able to achieve more on a one-on-one basis to start, as long as this still counts towards the court-ordered counseling. I'm more than happy to be in the same room as that bitch, I replied, plopping down in a chair and setting an A4 envelope on my lap. Can we try to refrain from name-calling, please? It's not constructive and only gets in the way, he said, his tone calm. I'm not here to be constructive. I just want to get through these sessions and finally get that unfaithful person out of my life for good. I never wanted to be here. She's just hell-bent on causing me as much pain as possible. She doesn't want the divorce because the prenup leaves her with nothing, so she's trying to force me into taking her back. It's not happening. And what about the child? Mr. Hensley pressed. He's innocent. Surely, he shouldn't be punished for. I don't give a shit about that kid. By your logic, I should take in every stray that couldn't keep her legs closed and ended up pregnant. Those kids have nothing to do with me, and neither does this one. Why are you so set on believing there's only one outcome here? He asked, his voice steady. You clearly loved her deeply. That kind of feeling doesn't just vanish overnight. Your anger is masking it right now, but once it settles, and trust me, it will, you'll find there are still feelings you can build on. Feelings that could help restore your relationship, maybe even make it stronger. That stupid smile was back again, and I felt the urge to punch him. Time to give him a taste of his own medicine. I gestured toward the picture on his desk. You have a nice family, I said. Been married long? We're not here to discuss my personal life. 11 years, if my sources are correct. Childhood sweetheart, married right out of college. Waited to have kids, and then little Ethan came along. What is he, 9 now? That picture must have been taken a couple of years ago. How did you? He started to ask. But did you know your darling Cheryl has her own secrets? I continued. Did you know that when she says she's at Pilates class on Wednesdays while you're working, she's actually at the Motel 8 on Patterson, screwing her personal trainer? That is completely ridiculous, he stammered, but I could see he was shaken. He had gone very pale. Really? I said, pulling several photographs from the envelope and slapping them down on his desk one by one. They showed a pretty slender woman entering a hotel room with a young muscle-bound man, his arm wrapped around her waist as they gazed lovingly at each other. I then pulled out a DVD and slapped it down too. There's footage from inside the room if you want actual proof of what they were getting up to. It's pretty graphic, so I wouldn't watch it if I were you. I made that mistake when I got my PI report. Those images will haunt me for the rest of my life. He looked like he might be sick. Oh, and one more thing, I added, pulling out a DNA report from the envelope. No, he said quietly. Please God, no. It appears that the fitness instructor isn't the first. I guess he would be too young to have fathered Ethan, but whoever the father is, it isn't you, I said quietly. He stood up and bolted for what I assumed was a bathroom off his office. I could hear him retching violently. Now do you understand? I asked when he finally sank back into his chair, tears streaming down his face. He looked at me with dead eyes. Do you see the pain she caused me and why I need to get her out of my life? I pressed. He nodded, looking utterly defeated. Good, I said, smirking a little. Now there's just one more thing you need to know. His face drained of color as he looked at me with dread. There's more? He asked, sounding pitiful. It's all fake. I shot back. None of what I just showed you is true. As far as I know, your wife is as loving and faithful as you thought she was, and Ethan is your son. But the photos, he stammered. Photoshop, I replied grimly. Amazing what you can do with some Facebook posts and a little time and effort. If you had them examined by anyone with half a brain, they'd tell you they're all fakes. I pulled out the originals I'd created them from. The DVD? He asked, his voice trembling. Blank, I replied flatly. And the DNA report? Is actually the DNA report for that cheating 304's baby. I just changed the names and dates, I said, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. He sat there, stunned, fresh tears beginning to stream down his face. Why would you do that? What did you think you could possibly achieve by wrecking my marriage and my life? He asked, his voice cracking. That was not my intention, I shot back. That's why I told you right away it was all fake. I never wanted you or your family to suffer permanent harm. I just wanted you, for once, to truly understand the pain I went through. The feelings of loss, anger, and hurt. You had a taste of it for a few minutes. I'm still living with it. Your brief misery is my daily reality now. Forcing me to sit here with that bitch, listening to her spout her shit about how she loves me and wants me back, just means I have to relive the pain over and over again. There are laws against cruel and unusual punishment. Why don't they apply here? I just want to move on, pick up the pieces of my life, and get on with it. Why can't you and the courts let me do that? I started gathering the documents from the table and shoved them back into the envelope. I'll leave this with you to dispose of, I said, my tone softening just a fraction. I am actually sorry to have had to do this, but I needed you to understand. Your Honor, I have the report from the court-mandated counseling that my client was instructed to attend, my lawyer said, addressing the judge with a mixture of formality and urgency. I have a copy, the judge growled, his eyes narrowing as he flipped through the pages. It appears that the counselor believes, even after only 3 sessions out of the mandated 8, that this marriage is beyond saving. For the well-being of all involved, including the child, the best course would be to allow its dissolution. Yes, Your Honor. I would request that you order the divorce be completed as per the petition, my lawyer pressed. The judge stared at me for a long moment. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet his eyes, not wanting to reveal the turmoil inside. So ordered, he said finally, banging his gavel with a finality that echoed in the courtroom. The judge glanced at the financial records before him and delivered his ruling with a tone that made it clear this was not a matter to be taken lightly. There will be no alimony, he stated, looking up at us. Ms. Kathy earns more than Mr. Porter, and both parties will retain their pre-marriage assets. The remainder will be divided 50-50. No alimony meant that I wouldn't be financially tethered to Kathy any longer. Kathy had lost her job, a fact that didn't surprise me in the least. One of her lovers had turned out to be a client, and I could only imagine the mess that would have ensued from that. I couldn't help but smirk internally at the irony of her situation. Then, as if it couldn't get any more ridiculous, I heard that she had filed a suit against 7 men, requesting the court to mandate DNA tests. I couldn't believe it. Here she was, dragging multiple men into the fray, all in an effort to sort out who the father of her child might be. The aftermath of the paternity test had set off a chain reaction that I couldn't have predicted. News spread like wildfire. All 7 wives of the men Kathy had been sleeping with filed for divorce against their husbands. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at the chaos she'd unleashed on everyone involved. It was like a karmic whirlwind, and I was just a bystander, watching the fallout. Last I heard, one of those angry wives had stormed into the courthouse and attacked Kathy. The image of her breaking Kathy's nose was almost poetic in a way. After everything Kathy had done, seeing her face bloodied and bruised felt like some kind of cosmic justice. I had to admit, I almost laughed when I heard about it. It was hard to feel any sympathy for her at that point. She had turned my life upside down, and now she was reaping what she had sown. Kathy had given birth to her child, but that didn't change how I felt about her or the situation. The cases against those 7 men were still lingering in the courts, and I wondered how long it would take for all that to finally be resolved. Honestly, I was just glad to be out of the mess. Kathy showed up at my house unannounced one afternoon, her face set with a mixture of desperation and entitlement. I could tell from the moment she walked through the door that she was on a mission to convince me to marry her again. She started spouting all this nonsense about how she had changed, how she realized what a mistake she had made, and how much she loved me. It was almost laughable considering everything that had happened. I stood my ground, refusing to let her manipulate me again. Kathy, it's over. We're done. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them, I told her firmly, trying to keep my cool. But she wouldn't let it go. She was relentless, her voice rising with every word, trying to make me feel guilty for not considering a reconciliation. Just then, Nancy, my girlfriend, came out from the kitchen. She must have sensed the tension in the room because she didn't hesitate to confront Kathy. You need to leave. You're not welcome here, she said, her tone sharp and unyielding. Kathy's response was explosive. She launched into an abusive tirade, spewing venomous insults and trying to demean Nancy, clearly believing she still had the power to intimidate. I could see Nancy's eyes narrow as Kathy continued her verbal assault. I felt a surge of protectiveness for Nancy, but I knew Kathy was unhinged, and I didn't want to escalate the situation. Then it happened. In a moment of rage, Kathy lunged at Nancy, trying to hit her. That was a huge mistake. Nancy, who was no stranger to standing her ground, expertly sidestepped Kathy's wild swing and retaliated with a brutal counterattack. She kicked her and threw her on the floor. I stood there, half in shock and half in admiration, as Nancy quickly gained the upper hand. She was fierce, and Kathy, who had always relied on her manipulative tactics, was clearly outmatched. Before I knew it, Nancy had Kathy pinned against the floor, her anger palpable. It was surreal, watching Kathy, the woman who had once held so much control over my life, reduced to this. I could hardly believe what I was witnessing. "Get the hell out of our lives, Kathy. You're not welcome here," Nancy shouted. In the midst of the chaos, I pulled out my phone and called the cops. Kathy was screaming by this point, but her words fell on deaf ears. The cops arrived shortly after, and Nancy calmly explained everything. They stepped in, quickly assessing the situation. Kathy, still defiant, tried to put on a show, claiming she was the victim, but it didn't take long for the officers to see through her act. As they handcuffed her and led her away, I felt an odd mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a sense of finality. It was the end of an era for me, the last remnants of her toxicity being dragged out of my life. I turned to Nancy, who was still shaking with adrenaline. "You were incredible," I said, feeling grateful to have her by my side. "Just doing what had to be done," she replied with a hint of a smile. In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I was ready to leave the past behind and embrace a future with someone who truly valued me, someone who wouldn't try to tear me down. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Grant Taylor. I was born in a medium-sized Midwestern city and grew up as an only child in a typical all-American family. This is my story. In high school, I was an athlete on the varsity team handball squad. It's not a widely popular sport across the country, but in my hometown, it had a dedicated following thanks to our coach, a passionate man from Eastern Europe who introduced it to our school. I was a decent athlete, tall and lean. But, honestly, I was drawn to team handball for one main reason: the girls. The girls' team practiced on the court right next to ours, and they were beautiful. I suspect our coach knew exactly what he was doing by scheduling practices side by side. It was a clever way to attract some of the school's best athletes to the team. Quite the honey trap, you could say. With that kind of motivation, I practiced hard and eventually became the top scorer on the team. A girl in my grade named Clara Bennett was on the girls' team. She was a beautiful, tall, blonde girl with stunning gray eyes. Clara and I became friends during our senior year of high school. Clara was excellent in math and I was good with computers, so we had some things in common besides team handball. She found me handsome and funny, and we became an item. We lost our virginity with each other the summer after graduating from high school. We were lovers all summer, but after some weeks Clara told me that because we would be going to college in different states it would be better for us to break up, rather than try to maintain a long-distance relationship. I was upset at the time, and we broke up then and there. I was single for the last month of summer. It was after my breakup with Clara that my neighbor, Evan Delgado, hired me to help him build a swimming pool in his backyard. He offered me some cash and the free use of his swimming pool after we completed it. I needed some money to get my old car fixed, so it worked out perfectly. Evan took a couple of weeks off work, and I helped him build the pool. His wife, Diane, would always bring us something to drink while we worked and would prepare lunch for us. I would always ask for low-fat milk rather than soft drinks or beer. The first time I requested this, she looked at me a little funny, but brought me milk. We finished the pool in less than 2 weeks, and Evan paid me more than promised. After we were done, he went back to work. I found myself at his swimming pool a lot for the rest of the summer. Evan and Diane had 2 younger sons, aged 6 and 8. I liked the 2 boys and I played a lot with them out at the pool. Diane liked that I entertained her sons. I used the swimming pool nearly every day in August, and I began to notice Diane frequently looking at me with some interest. I have to admit that I looked at her with some interest too. She was a stunning 29-year-old woman with a captivating figure and long, graceful legs. I especially liked when she was in her bikini and would hang out in the pool with us. She was originally from Eastern Europe, and her mesmerizing accent always had a way of making my heart race. One day, I was at the pool and was getting ready to leave. The boys were in their rooms playing video games. I mentioned to Diane that I had to get some stuff for my college dorm. She told me that she knew of all kinds of sales and would help me with my shopping. She told me to go with her the next day, that her sons would be busy with sports, so we could have the whole day to spend together. She walked up to me confidently, gently placing her hand on my chest and tracing a finger down my face. Leaning in close, she whispered softly in my ear, "You know, Grant, in my home country, there's an expression. It translates to, different gyms train the body better." Surprised, I stumbled over my words and managed to ask, "What does that mean?" "It means, Grant," she said as she slowly pulled away to look me in the eyes with a look that said I was a piece of meat and she was a starving dog, that a different lover would be most exciting for me. I was frozen in place. "I'll see you tomorrow, Grant," she said with a twinkle in her eye. I stumbled home in a lustful daze. I told my dad that I want to go with Diane to shop for college supplies. My dad's brain worked quickly and got the whole story from me with a little prompting. He told me to consider that if I had an affair with Diane, she could lose her husband. He asked me if Evan divorced Diane, would I leave college and marry Diane and raise her children? I told him that I didn't love her and didn't want to marry her. He told me to consider that while Evan was a nice guy, he was also a big, strong man and would not stand for me sleeping with his wife. He told me to consider that Evan was a man and would likely beat me if he found out that I had screwed his wife. He told me that while he and Mom would visit me in the hospital if I survived, but they wouldn't feel too badly for what would happen to me if Evan got a hold of me. That gave me another pause for thought. He also informed me that if Evan beat the hell out of me, he would go to prison. If that happened, would I leave college and would I help Diane and her children? By the end of our talk, I felt embarrassed. My dad persuaded me and I canceled this adventure with Diane. I guess I had never thought of adultery before my talk with my dad, but he gave me a lot to think about. I realized that adultery was not something to condone or engage in. Everybody loses. Needless to say, I didn't go over to Evan and Diane's pool anymore after that, and I did not speak to Diane for a long time. I went to college and I lived the usual student life. I dated several girls and even slept with a few, but I did not find the one. I was not too wild, but I partied some and drank my share of beers. Interestingly, except for at parties, milk remained my drink of choice. After graduation, I came home. I got a job at a medium-sized firm, working in the IT department. Not long after I started, I happened to run into Clara. She told me she had been hired to teach math at a local high school. She was single, I was single, so we began to date. Soon, we were in love. A few months into our renewed relationship, she became pregnant. I asked her to be my wife. I was going to anyway, honest, and she accepted my proposal. We were married shortly thereafter and settled into a happy married life. Our son was born 4 months after our marriage. Our daughter was born 2 years later. Clara stayed at home with our children. We planned for her to do that until they were both of school age, at least. Our sex life was probably similar to that of most young married couples with small children, 3 to 4 times weekly, down from our bunny-like habits before our son was born. My mom's parents had died and left me with a little money. I was their only grandchild, which I used for a down payment on a nice suburban house. That windfall, plus my pretty good salary, allowed us to live comfortably with just me working. However, we didn't do too many extravagant things. Our typical recreation and holidays were spent with my family or Clara's family. My dad's parents lived in an old farmhouse on a lake about 50 miles from us, and we would visit them a lot. They had a big, empty house and loved to have us visit. We would fish, play in the water, and just have a great time as a family. My granddad was a hunter and I went with him to hunt frequently. We brought home the game and my grandma and my wife cooked them. My dad was always more of a fisherman, so hunting was a thing my granddad and I shared together, just the two of us. My dad had the habit of taking my son out fishing, so maybe that would be a special granddad and grandson tradition for the two of them someday. My granddad liked hunting with shotgun for birds. Once he told me on a hunting trip that he had once put the fear of God into a guy who was making unwanted advances on grandma by changing the buckshot from a shell and replacing it with fine salt. Apparently, hitting a guy with that would give a good dose of pain for days. Plus, it would scare the shit out of whoever was on the receiving end. He died when the kids were still small, and Grandma moved to our city. We kept the old farmhouse, and my father kept the weapons and the cartridges. My wife was adamant about not wanting them in our house with the kids and all. Sometimes all the logic in the world cannot sway a woman's opinion, so it's just not worth the fight. When I wanted to go up hunting to my grandparents' property, I would just stop over at my parents' house and grab the guns. During the summers, we often would go to my parents' or Clara's parents' house for the day. Frequently when we did, we would go over to Evan and Diane's pool. They liked our children same as I had liked their children earlier. It had been some years since Diane's indecent proposal to me, so there was no weirdness between us. In fact, she seemed like the model wife and mother. I chalked her behavior with me up as a one-time thing. In fact, Diane became like a true aunt for our children. I had been working at my employers for a little over 8 years, having been promoted to project leader, when my boss got permission from the CEO and the owners to build a central IT system. Long story short, the opportunity was great for our company, and my career in particular. It involved many months of long hours. I worked late most evenings for the better part of the year, but thankfully we only worked 1 or 2 weekends a month. It was a stress on my relationship with my wife and kids, but I was doing it for my family. 6 or 7 months into the project, I was sent out of town for 2 weeks to work with another division. While there, I worked closely with another department head, and Doherty. She was an impressive 30-something brunette with a sharp mind and a strong presence. She was married and she had a son and a daughter, like me. I was acquainted with her from my early days with my employer, when she worked at the same office. We had always gotten on well back then, and it was nice to see her again. We worked with each other closely for most of those 2 weeks, and we just clicked. There was a definite chemistry there. I worked with her, or her colleagues, all day into the evening, and joined me for dinner and drinks several times, catching up with each other, discussing old acquaintances, and just keeping each other company. It appears she had been very busy for the last few months as well, and knew that she would be putting in long hours while I was in town with my team. She explained that her husband was gone for a week with their kids, visiting his parents out of town while she was busy with the project. I couldn't help but notice that and got increasingly flirtatious with me as the weeks went on. I also noticed that she wore sexy perfume and had a habit of unbuttoning her blouse and leaning into me at every opportunity. I had been out of the game for a while, but I knew the signals and wanted me. No doubt about it, I was tempted, especially given that my sexual needs had suffered for the last few months. And the wife was a couple of states away, and I were the last two working on the Friday before my departure on Saturday. She insisted we go out, just the two of us, for one last night of dinner. When I met her at the hotel bar, my jaw dropped. She was dressed to the nines. Tiny little black dress with a deep V-neck showing all kinds of firm, ripe cleavage. Her sky-high heels showed her legs to the best possible advantage, her skirt knee-length with a slit that showed her entire left leg when she took a stride. I ordered her a drink and asked her where she wanted to go for dinner. She told me with quiet, seductive voice, "How about we go to your room and order in?" I stammered something completely unintelligible, and she continued, "Don't be shy, Grant. We've been building to this for 2 weeks, and you know it. Tonight's the night. My husband is out of town. Your wife is a million miles away, and it's just you and me. Just tonight. Just this once." I looked at her in awe. I had never been too tempted in my life. If I am being honest, I was probably never so turned on. It was as if a pheromone cloud enveloped me. I felt dizzy. I knew, somewhere deep inside, that this would happen that night. But nothing prepared me for the reality of the seduction. I gazed at her, those eyes, those lips, and then she kissed me, a soul-searing kiss, and I kissed her back. God help me, but I wanted her as much as I've ever wanted a woman in my entire life. And we were alone in a sea of nothingness. I drove home from the airport in autopilot mode. I had survived the test. Before my will had been broken, the kiss was, and I had pulled away. Deep inside, I found the strength to resist and reject what every fiber of my body was desperate to take. I felt amazement that I had come so close to the precipice, but a certain pride in not falling into the abyss. I felt as if I had awoken from a comatose state, and had sparked a level of attraction in me that I had never felt before, and hadn't taken it very well, calling me a pathetic loser or something like that. But I just smiled, nodded, wished her a good night, and returned to my room, alone. When I returned home to my family, I couldn't hug and kiss them enough. I think I took them all by surprise at my reaction, but I was honestly the happiest I had been in the longest time. I had long, passionate, tender sex with Clara Saturday and Sunday nights when the children slept. She was pleased with me, and we renewed our vows of love for each other that weekend. I resolved to take more care to prioritize my wife and children, even if I had to work mad hours. I returned to work on Monday, made my reports to the bosses for my 2 weeks away, caught up on my correspondence, and left at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. Clara was again surprised by my early arrival. I joined her at our son's handball game, seeing him for the first time that season, chatting with other parents, and having a good time with my family. We went out for pizza afterwards. That night, I made love to my wife for the 3rd night in a row. For the first time in over a year, I am sure. "Wow," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow after our second round of lovemaking. "If I didn't miss you so much when you were gone, I would suggest that you go away for 2 weeks more often. I just realized how important you are to me," I said, "and I wanted to show you just how much I love you." And I'm sorry if I haven't been showing you that enough these last months. Baby, I know you're doing this for us, but it means a lot when you show me how much you care like this. Now, let me show you just how much I love you, she said as she moved closer, holding me in a warm embrace. A third round of passionate sex followed, another first in a long time for us, and called me several days later. She was coy and non-committal, but I got the sense that she wanted to see if I was having any second thoughts about not taking her up on her offer. I told her politely but firmly that I didn't regret my decision to turn her down and that I would not cheat on my wife. She apologized for her forward behavior. I told her not to worry about it, and I assured her that I would be discreet. She expressed gratitude for that, and then sounded embarrassed by the whole episode. I told her she would have seduced me if I had been a bachelor, that it was a compliment her that I had had such a hard time refusing her advances. She cried a little and told me that her husband neglected her, and that she had strong suspicions that he might have a mistress. She told me that she had not cheated on him before, but that she liked me, was attracted to me, and thought I was the perfect person with whom to seek a little attention, affection, and reinforcement of her own attractiveness. I told her that I appreciated that. I told her that I didn't want to get mixed up in her relationship, but I wished her well. A few months later, I was again sent to Anne's outstate office for a week of meeting. Again, I worked long days and evenings with Anna and her team during the testing period. Anna was very proper to me, but I did notice that she seemed to have a very close connection with a young male colleague of hers, Jeff something. One evening at the office, I went to the restroom in the nearly empty building. When I returned, I saw Jeff talking closely to Anna, his hand on her back as he whispered something to her. Anna noticed me standing in the doorway and gently pulled away from him, shrugging it off. She had the good grace to look a little embarrassed, and I had the good grace to remain silent about them. I was pleased Anna was not my wife. A couple months later, our big project was wrapping up successfully, and I had a promotion and raise coming. That made me happy, but I was happier that I would be able to get back to a more normal schedule. The boss sent me and a couple of members of my team to a week-long IT training seminar in Jacksonville, Florida. I've never, before or since, seen so many attractive women with such huge tits per capita in all my life as I did in Northeast Florida. Amazing, really. I met with many people from different companies. One night, I was in the bar of the hotel, where the seminar was held. I was the youngest one at the table, only 29 years old. When I revealed that, one of the guys at the table asked if the first round of divorces was hitting my friends yet. I asked him what he meant. He informed me that, these days, everyone gets married in their young to mid-20s, and the divorces started in the late 20s and early 30s. The others at the table nodded and snickered. One of the guys at the table, an elder fellow in his mid-50s, told us he had been married twice and he was successful in his second divorce. I asked him what he meant. He said that he was burned by his first divorce, so prepared for the second one just in case. He told us that he hid a little money from his second wife very carefully, so as not to be discovered in the event of divorce. I questioned his honesty, and he informed me that his second wife wasn't too honest when he caught her cheating on him with the pool boy. In any event, his thinking was that, if the marriage had been successful, he would have had a secret reserve for emergency and extra money for the grandchildren. But, since his wife was a cheating 304, instead he managed to have a secret restart fund after the smoke had cleared after his divorce. He apparently had managed to squirrel away well in excess of $100,000 that his wife never discovered. He had a head start on restarting his life after his second divorce. Good for him. Everyone else at the table seemed to have a divorce nightmare story, or had several friends who had been through the ringer. It was an eye-opener for me. While I loved and trusted my wife, I started to think that this secret fund idea was a pretty smart move. If nothing else, it could be a nice little secret college fund for the kids, or a nice retirement fund to surprise my wife with 30 or 35 years down the road. From that day on, I started a secret fund, depositing small cash withdrawals every week and requesting any and all bonuses to be issued separately into separate retirement accounts. All in all, it equaled maybe 5% of my gross earnings. Enough to matter, not enough to be too noticeable. Life went on. The kids grew, Clara and I prospered, and I was a happy man. 3 years later at a company event I ran into, and again, she told me that Jeff, the single colleague, had been her lover those few years ago, but that he had left for California and she had not any lover since then. Her marriage is good now, and her husband Jim, and she rebuilt their marriage for their children. We were alone at the table, and the loud music allowed us to talk with some privacy. So I was a little cheeky and asked her about how it all came about, and her honesty took me by surprise. How did you reconcile with your husband? This is interesting, because I caught him cheating. Jim has a construction firm, and one of his woman colleagues was his mistress. I confronted him with my knowledge and demanded that he stop. Of course, I didn't bother to tell him I had cheated on him, too. So you were the engine for the reconciliation, were you? Yes, I suppose I was. After I confronted him, he broke it off with her and he asked me to forgive him. I told him I would try, but that we needed to go to marriage counseling. This was my best idea. But you were never honest with him? True. But he was a worse cheater than me. We worked with the counselor for a few months, couples counseling and individual sessions, too. We addressed our underlying problems, which were more serious than the cheating itself. So, no, I didn't ever fess up completely, but I didn't see a reason for it. And I didn't beat him up about his cheating too much, either. I just wanted to fix us at that point. I guess sinners can forgive each other easier. I observed, and looked at me speculatively, then said, exactly. The counselor was smart, and he guessed that I had cheated, too. We talked about it during my individual sessions, but he kept my secret from Jim. He agreed that my cheating was about self-image and acceptance, maybe even revenge, but my infidelity wasn't the problem with our relationship. Lack of care and attention and intimacy with each other was the problem. Besides communication and prioritizing our time together, he also recommended an interesting sex practice, which helped to save our marriage. Really? That is interesting, I prompted. You see, this is kind of embarrassing to talk about, but I trust you. Part of our reestablishing our intimacy and emotional connection involved a very primal physical connection. What could be more primal than sex between a man and a woman? I asked, and said, a little red-faced, well, the marriage counselor recommended more sex for us. I was glad that Ann and Jim had reconciled. I was not sure I ever could in either of their shoes, but to each their own. If they were happier now, then I was happy for them. It wasn't until our daughter Sophie was 10 years old and my son Keith was 12 that Clara finally went back to teaching math in a high school. She took a couple of refresher courses that summer, but was able to pretty much jump right back in. She was really gifted when it came to math. Our kids took after her in that way. In fact, they were both excellent students. Like Clara and I, they were also tall and good athletes. They, too, became team handball players. I was very proud of my kids. Clara really threw herself into her work. I suppose with the kids getting older and needing her less, she was looking for another outlet. In addition to teaching high school math, she volunteered to be the coach of the school's math team. As such, she met with and trained several skilled students weekly, twice extra 2 hours of teaching after school. She received a small stipend for her work, but it wasn't about the money. She trained them for student math competitions. Under her tutelage, the team did extracurricular well. As a team, they placed third in state the first year. The next year, they placed second and qualified for the national competition. She traveled with the students to Pennsylvania for the competition. One of her students, a shy gangly kid named Rob, was among the best 10 mathematics students in the national competition, and he ultimately got full academic scholarship to Caltech. Clara was particularly proud of him, as he was talented, but never really gave math his full effort until she chose him for the math team. For the 2 years he was on the team, she put in extra time and effort with him. Their hard work and dedication paid off. I was proud of Clara's accomplishments. Life was good. By this time, I was 37 years old. I was successful and happy in my work and family. I still went out and hunted from time to time, and we still went out to my grandparents' property as a family to fish and play in the water. We still visited our parents frequently and still spent time in Evan and Diane's pool. Life was good. Sure, my sex life with Clara had slowed down some. We weren't kids in our 20s any longer, but we still had a pretty good, if rather familiar, love life. I still loved her with all my heart, and we still had fun together when we could find the time. Her returning to work decreased our time together. She was often busy with the math team, or with grading homework, quizzes, and tests. No multiple choice questions in her classes. She was a show-you-work kind of teacher. But I couldn't begrudge her teaching career. It clearly gave her a great deal of satisfaction. In any event, my responsibilities had increased at work as well, and I was putting in plenty of hours of my own. Still, I did find myself with more alone time than I had been used to, with the kids busy with their own activities. They were 15 and 13, respectively, and Clara busy with her work. I've always been a fan of fiction, and I started exploring various online story websites. While I enjoyed science fiction and adventure short stories, I also came across some adult-themed sites. I became particularly interested in stories about infidelity, not the explicit fantasy ones, but the dramatic narratives about cheating spouses. To be honest, it became a bit of an obsession. Every day, I'd browse through new submissions, seeking tales of love, betrayal, and loss. I found myself captivated by the stories of revenge against unfaithful partners and I couldn't help but root for the betrayed spouses as they rebuilt their lives. Although my own marriage was strong, I'd seen enough of my friends experience the turmoil of divorce to understand their pain. I have to admit that reading these stories got to me. I suppose reading too much of that stuff will put crazy ideas in your head. It did to me anyway. Although I trusted my wife, I did get niggling suspicions. Telling myself I was doing it as a lark, I even secretly checked the DNA of my children. They were mine. All right. Still, my suspicions did not totally subside. I read more and I began to think about bugs and web cameras for secret surveillance. I bought these instruments from my secret accounts. Yes, I was still maintaining those. And these electric gadgets I connected to a dedicated personal server at my office. Schools were out for summer. Keith and Sophie went away to summer camps at the same time. Clara was at home almost all day. I assembled the bugs and the web cameras in our house and activated the recordings. I checked the activity for a few days, discovering nothing out of the ordinary, and I began to feel like a creep. Why was I doing this? Why was I invading my wife's privacy? Because of paranoia from reading a bunch of silly stories? I stopped my madness and forgot about the surveillance. It was about this time that a pretty big project landed on my desk. I was really busy for a couple of weeks. After we finally finished the project, I was back in my office, pushing papers and screwing around with my electronic files. I was reminded of my surveillance project. I intended to dismantle the entire insane operation, but decided to give a few of the files a quick look for the hell of it. I looked at them, and I almost fell off my chair in surprise. It was literally the first tape I watched. My loving wife had a lover, the recent high school graduate math team star and soon-to-be Caltech scholarship student. The little a-hole apparently lost his virginity to my cheating wife. It was a whole seduction routine, with my wife as his sex teacher. It was not lost on me that this was a lot like the Diane episode from my own younger days, except this a-hole actually screwed my wife. I reviewed a couple more surveillance videos. Sure enough, they had sex multiple times in my house while my kids were away at camp. I didn't bother listening to everything, but it seemed clear that my wife had taken quite an interest in little Rob, and not just in his brain. It appeared that my wife was taking her tutoring to the next level. It was clear that she intended to be done with him after their 2-week-long tryst, but it was no mistake. I was enraged. My first idea was to kill them, but let myself calm a little and realized that I didn't want to land in prison. Plus, I wasn't a murderer, and I couldn't do that to my kids. My next idea was to figure out a way to set up my wife and send her to prison for a few years, maybe one in Southeast Asia? Clearly, I had to give this whole situation some thought. I instructed my secretary to hold all my calls, cancel all my appointments for the day, and allow no one to disturb me. I closed the door and I examined the voice files carefully. If the cheating affair started while Rob Boy was still in high school, I could get my wife fired, maybe even arrested. But it appeared that their brief affair only commenced during that 2-week period after his graduation. So, maybe no criminal charges and no guaranteed firing, but I could be a vindictive a-hole and present my wife as a cheating 304 teacher to our community. Best case scenario, public humiliation for her, and maybe she would lose her job and teaching license. But I didn't want to humiliate my kids. They didn't deserve to be collateral damage in all of this. Same with her parents. They had always been good to me. I listened to the last few recordings more carefully. They were planning a last meeting. A meeting for tomorrow. Damn them. Thoughts of mayhem again entered my imagination. I calmed myself with the greatest exertion of willpower. Even though I didn't want to go public with the videos of my wife's affair, I considered that she wouldn't know that. Therefore, I could possibly blackmail my soon-to-be ex-wife and obtain the best divorce terms possibly. That would give me some satisfaction and justice. But Rob needed to be taught a lesson, as well. I recalled my granddad's solution to a predator all those years ago. I took the rest of the day off and contacted a top divorce lawyer. I got an appointment for the next day and took the next 2 days off work. I went to my parents and I told them what I had found out. A little while later, my father found me down in the basement with Granddad's old shotguns. He expressed alarm, but I explained my intended revenge. In the end, he helped to change the lead buckshot to fine salt crystal and some cartridges. I also took along one of my granddad's old pistols. I called my cheating wife and told her that I had to go out of town that night for a work emergency and that I would be back in 2 days. She seemed pleased enough with my plans. The bitch. That night, I considered my options in a calmer state of mind. Could I reconcile with my wife? Should I try? It seemed like it was a one-time, short affair. She didn't love the kid, but they were clearly close. Still, it wasn't like she wanted to run away with him. And I watched the tapes. He wasn't anything special in bed. In fact, He screwed like one would expect from an 18-year-old virgin. Sloppy, quick, and overeager. My wife spent time with him occasionally, but it always seemed like an extension of the mentoring she had been doing for him, helping him in ways that were both personal and professional. No excuse, but it didn't seem to be about love or a desire for sexual satisfaction that she was missing with me. Thing was, this was no one-time slip. It was premeditated. It was intentional. It was a sign of her disrespect for me and our marriage. I couldn't live with that. I couldn't remain married to this woman. This woman that I had loved for so long. She just screwed everything up. Maybe I wasn't as good a person as Anne. I just couldn't forgive and forget. Ever. I had to move on, and I had to have my revenge. Since killing a cheating wife and her lover wasn't considered socially acceptable, I would have to get my pound of flesh in some other way. These thoughts swirled in my head until I finally fell asleep. My children are so old they could come to me freely, and I could meet them a lot. The next day I went to the lawyer and we discussed about my possibilities. Since we had no prenuptial agreement, all marital assets would be divided in 50 to 50%. Since my inheritance paid for our down payment, I would most likely be entitled to a greater share of the proceeds from the sale of the house. He told me that the children were old enough so that their wishes would be factored into the physical custody arrangement, but that their mother had been the primary caretaker for most of their lives, so she was more likely to get primary physical custody. He told me that there was a chance of 50 to 50 physical custody as well, but only if the parties agreed. The lawyer told me that the house would remain intact until the youngest child became 18 years old, and we could sell it and share 50 to 50%, less my down payment. Although she had a full-time teaching job, I made significantly more money than Clara, and I had a lot more in my retirement accounts than she had. My lawyer told me I would likely have to pay her alimony for some time, and child support as well, unless I had primary physical custody. I told him that I wanted divorce, and that I would get her to agree to my terms. He said that all documents would be ready in a week. I thought my children would come home before this. I went to the banks and organized our bank interest for the divorce proceedings. I checked the time. It was time for my early return. I parked my car down the block from our house and took my bag of weapons and walked to my home. I entered the house silently through the back door. The coast was clear. I crept upstairs to the master bedroom. I burst into the bedroom, and I shot the cheaters who were going at it. I shot both salt cartridges into them. They literally flew off the bed, howling in pain and fear. I admired my handiwork for a few moments. When the two cheaters realized that they were not seriously wounded, though in great pain, I threw the empty shotgun to the floor and cleared my throat. They froze, staring at me with grimaces of pain etched on their faces. I stared at them with a look of contempt on my face. I slowly, deliberately took the pistol out of my jacket pocket. Then, I let a look of rage break out over my face. "I'll kill you," I shouted. The young lover boy and my cheating wife screamed in fear. My wife and Rob pissed themselves from fear of death. I aimed the pistol at young Rob. My cheating wife moaned with voice filled with pain. "Don't kill him." Ignoring her pleas, I moved to him deliberately. He closed his eyes and cowered. I kicked the balls and body of the wallowing a-hole. My rage was not feigned. It felt good. Seeing him rolling on the floor in agony, tears on his face, with a butt cheek full of fine salt buckshot satisfied my sense of vengeance. I regained my composure again. I have given up on this marriage, but I wanted to leave a little reminder for the two cheaters. I waited for him to recover a bit. Clara was on the floor, clutching a bed sheet to her chest, a look of fear and confusion written all over her face. She remained silent. Once he was back to breathing steadily, I again lowered the pistol to his head and said, "You little a-hole. You will learn to stay away from my wife." Rob moaned from pain and pleaded for his life. "Don't kill me." "Why not? It's that or you give up Caltech. If I let you live, are you willing to give up college and take care of my wife when I divorce the bitch?" The moaning young lover boy wanted to play the knight with shining armor. "Yes, I'll give that up. I'll support her." I shook my head with pity. "Then you are totally stupid. You are a stupid boy if you would give up your academic future for a 304 almost 20 years older than you." I paused. "I'm not going to kill you, moron. I'm not going to kill either of you. She's a 304 and you're a stupid kid. Neither of you are worth it," I sighed. The air was full of relief, because they understood I would not kill them, but they weltered in their own piss from their pain and, I would hope, their shame. I turned back to Rob and told him with a cold voice, "But, if I will see you near to my wife again, I will kill you. Do you understand me?" "Yes, I do." My cheating wife moaned from the pain in the background and she cried. I continued, "Listen, Rob, here's what's going to happen. You're not going to say anything to anyone about what happened here today. Got it? You will get out of town for good by the end of the week. I don't care where you go, but you will go, and you will stay gone for the rest of the summer. Maybe you head out to California early to check out the campus. I don't care, but you leave town. If I see you around after the end of the week, you're a dead man. Do you understand me? Rob looked at me, and I knew he believed every word I said. Yes, I do. I thought about the fact that I did not want to pay my wife alimony or excessive child support, so I decided one more instruction was necessary to protect her job. One last thing, lover boy. I don't want you saying a word to anyone about your sordid little affair with my wife. If I find out you told even one person what you and she did, or about this morning, I'll put a bullet in your brain. Do you understand? I understand. I haven't said anything about this to anyone, and I never will. I promise. I stared at him long and hard. Finally, I replaced the pistol into my pocket and said, I believe you, Rob. That's the only reason you're still alive. That, and it's obvious to me that you're just a weak, stupid kid. Don't make me regret this, Mercy. He shook his head frantically. Your butt is gonna be sore as hell for a few days, but there's no real harm done. I shot you with salt. When you get home, take a shower and wash it gently. Maybe put on a dressing. You don't need to go to the doctor or anything. The scabbing should be gone in a week or two. If anyone asks, you fell off your bicycle. Got it? Good. Now, get dressed and get out. The young a-hole got dressed and left the house. I closed the door after him. I went back to the bedroom, where my wife was still cowering with tears on her face. I said, go take a shower. She went to the bathroom moaning and crying. I went to the kitchen and poured a full glass of cold milk. I always preferred milk. It had a calming effect on me. I chuckled wryly a little and I drank it. My wife finished her shower. I could hear her in the bedroom crying. She started when I spoke to her. Get dressed and wait for me here. I'll be back within an hour. We've got some talking to do. Grant, Just shut up, Clara. We can talk when I get back. Just wait here for me. I threw the bag with the shotgun and pistol into my car and drove them back to my parents' house. My dad met me there. He looked at me with a question in his eye. Yeah, it went like we planned. She was there with him, humping away like a couple of rabbits. Just dump the guns, Dad. I don't think either is going to squeal, but it would be best if the guns disappeared. He nodded, and I returned home. There were no police, and that was a good sign. My wife was in the bedroom cleaning the mess from the carpet. I gazed at her. At 36, she was still a beautiful woman. I sighed, and she turned, a look of profound sadness on her face. I felt drained. Much of my hate and rage had been dissipated by my earlier encounter. Putting a couple of shells worth of salt into a pair of cheating a-holes will do that for you, Grant? I'm sorry. I really am. I won't lie to you. This wasn't our only time, but it was going to be our last time. Just stop, Clara. I said wearily. Please, Grant. Just let me tell you, I've never done anything like this before. I didn't plan it. Well, I didn't go looking for it, at least. I don't love him. He was so special to me, and we got so close, and look, there's no excuse, but no, there's no excuse, Clara. But there are consequences. Please, Grant. I know I did wrong, but I wasn't thinking straight. He had such a crush on me, it felt good to my ego. I thought I was giving him a gift. He was a virgin, and you decided to be his teacher in the bedroom, too. I get it, Clara. You wanted a little change, and this kid was your opportunity. No, Grant. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that I wanted something you weren't giving me. He wasn't anywhere near as good in bed as you. He's just a kid. For God's sake. Yes, he is. About that, how stupid are you, Clara? You don't think a kid is going to talk to his friends about nailing his hot math teacher? And you are hot, Clara. You don't think this sort of thing is going to get around? Even if it never gets past the rumor stage, you don't think word of this is going to slip out? Didn't you think how this sort of thing could hurt you? Your career, your marriage, our kids, for Christ's sake? Rob wouldn't tell anyone. Bullshit, Clara. The little a-hole would have let it slip out. Maybe not today, maybe not this summer. But at some point, when he was back in town over Thanksgiving break maybe, he would be hanging out with his friends, having had a few too many beers, and he would have said something. Just let a few details slip. And that's all it takes, Clara. Well, that, and you whoring around on me in the first place. Please, Grant, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I don't blame you, but please. You have to see that I love you very much. This was just a situation that got out of hand. It was an ego trip disguised as good intentions. I promise you, I have never done it before, and I would never do it again. Well, I'm certainly glad you weren't planning on making your glory hole an annual award for your best math student. Look, Clara, you haven't asked me yet, but I know what's been going on. I'm moving into the guest room for a while. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do yet, but I want you to just give me some space and leave me alone till I figure it out. Got it? Yes, Grant. I understand. The kids came home a couple of days later. Clara and I tried to act normally around them. The kids were excited to tell us about their time at camp, then became so busy with their friends and other activities that I don't think they noticed anything unusual between Clara and I. I could see that Clara was putting on a brave front, though she was a nervous wreck. To her credit, she left me alone for several days. I took mercy on her. Clara, could we talk? I asked her one night, after the kids had gone to bed. Yes, of course, Grant. Her eyes held a look of apprehension. I've decided that we need to divorce. Oh no, she wailed, but quietly, so as not to disturb the children. I was impressed by her self-control. Yes, Clara. I was going to have you served with divorce papers tomorrow. Well, I still am, but I didn't want it to come as a complete shock. I wouldn't say I owe you this, after what you did, but I wanted to tell you face to face. Clara understood, but she asked the mandatory question in such situations, please, Grant, isn't there any hope for reconciliation? I love you. I screwed up. I don't understand it myself, exactly. Rob was never a threat to us. Oh God. Please, Grant. Please. She pleaded with tears streaming down her face. No, Clara, there is not. This was not a one-time drunken sex. That I could forgive. No, what you did was to premeditatively decide to become the sex teacher to a virgin young a-hole for weeks. I don't know why exactly, and I don't care. You did it intentionally. The woman I married would not have done that, would not have risked our marriage and our family to satisfy some curiosity, or to take pity, or to satisfy her ego, or whatever. No, you changed, Clara, and now I've changed. You broke your vows, and now I am free of this marriage. And I don't believe in open marriages, Clara. It might work for some, but it would never work for me. To get the freedom from this marriage that I need, I have to divorce you. My mind is made up. And then the sobbing came. She was disconsolate, racked with sobs, choking on her own pain. I felt some compassion for her, but I had given this thought. I was unmoved in my resolve, but I was, almost despite myself, moved by her pain. At last, she regained some of her composure. To her credit, she didn't drag out her pleas. I couldn't tell if she had truly accepted my decision. I wasn't sure how she would respond once the wheels were in motion, but at least she was rational again. I understand, Grant. You are going to divorce me, and our marriage is over. What's going to happen? You'll be served tomorrow with the papers. As angry as I am, as angry as I was, I don't hate you so much anymore, and I don't want to destroy you totally. We still have our children. We will have their interests to bind us together in their future. Yes, we will still have them. Won't we, Grant? She managed a small, sad smile, and risked a hopeful gaze into my eyes. I'm not sure what she was looking for, but she didn't find it. The smile disappeared and she looked down at her hands again. You should look for a lawyer, Clara, and have him review my divorce petition. But I recommend you accept the divorce conditions. They're fair, and I don't want to fight about them. I've suggested 50-50 legal custody of our children with you as primary physical custodian here at this house, with me getting unlimited visitation and physical custody every other weekend, and for me to get them for a month in the summer. You work less than I do, and you've always been a good mother to them, so it's only right that they stay here with you. I've provided for you to get the standard child support, based on our incomes. But there will be no alimony. You get half our liquid assets, and I get half. I keep my retirement accounts, and you keep yours, and your pension. And, once the kids are grown, we will sell the house, and split the proceeds 50-50, but I get back the down payment, plus interest. I understood. I will accept those divorce conditions. Will you tell our children why we have divorced? I won't tell them until Sophie graduates from high school, if ever. And I won't show them the video of you and Rob. I promise you that much. You have a video? Yep. And voice recordings, too. I have all the evidence I need to burn you down to the ground. A look of fear crossed her face, then. Don't worry, Clara. I was prepared to use them if I needed to, as leverage. But you've been cooperative. Stay cooperative, and I promise they will never see the light of day. Tomorrow, we can tell the kids that we're getting a divorce. I'll be moving in with my parents the next day. She made one last attempt. Grant, it will be difficult to live without you. You have been my only love. Please? Her voice was weak and soft, like a child's whisper. I steeled myself. I am sorry, Clara. After I move out, If you need something with the house or with the kids, well, you have my number. But as for anything else, my mind is made up. That's the way it is. Clara began crying again. I was difficult telling the kids that we were going to divorce. We didn't say anything about Clara's romps with Rob, and the kids were mystified. They cried, and we promised them that it wasn't their fault, but that there was no chance of us getting back together. I moved out the next day and into the next chapter of my life. My parents were saddened by our divorce, but they were glad when their grandchild spent the weekends with us every second time. Time by time, everybody became used to it. I didn't date much. I worked a lot, saw my kids as much as I could, and really didn't dedicate much time to women. After a year or so, I began to get very lonely. I tried internet dating and such, but none of the women I met appealed to me. It seemed every woman I had any interest in was either hard and jaded by men, or was a woman of loose morals. The latter category made for a few fun dates, but I was interested in something serious and long-term. On a lark, I investigated international dating websites. I had always had an interest in Buddhism and found myself on a website dedicated to dating Laotian women. That's where I met her. Her name was Nina Fuang. She was beautiful, she was young, only 23, and she was smart. She was a university graduate who had a good education from a Laotian high school. Her father was a surgeon, her mother a nurse. She was interested in finding an American man. I started chatting with her, and we got along great. She was fluent in English. Did I mention she was beautiful? She was tall for a Laotian gal, 5 feet 3 inches, with long black hair, dark eyes and light, honey brown skin. I was drawn to her. I told her I was recently divorced and had 2 teenage kids. At first I thought this news would be difficult to her, but she only wanted to know the circumstances of my divorce. I told her the truth, and she told me that she would never cheat on me. After a few months of correspondence and video chat, we planned for me to go to Laos to meet her. I used my secret money fund for the trip. It had come in handy, after all. I traveled to Vientiane, where Nina worked, via Bangkok, and Nina and her parents met me at the airport and escorted me to my hotel. Nina was living with her parents. Nina looked better in life than on video, and she smiled with her whole being when we first saw each other in person. I fell in love with her at first sight. We had lunch or dinner with her family several times during my 3-week stay. We went sightseeing with her parents. I went out with Nina alone, too, but the family was obviously a very important part of her life. Once I was with Nina and her friend in a restaurant. She was a teacher like Nina, and she told me, when Nina went to the toilet, that Nina had a fiancé who died in a job accident 1 week before their wedding. She said that Nina was depressed for months after that, and finally emerged from that state. Some months later, Nina was still not dating. So her friend suggested that she try a dating website. She had been on it for several months, with no real interest in anyone, until she met me. She observed that I was like medicine to her, that she had really come alive again when we started corresponding. She admonished me not to break Nina's heart. I knew that Nina had been engaged before, and that her fiancé had died, but I didn't know about her depression and the rest of the story. I was touched. Before I departed, I knew what I had to do. Very simply, I asked her if she wanted to be my wife, and she told me yes. I gave her an engagement ring. She knew the Western custom, and she was glad for the ring. We kissed and hugged and professed our love to each other. I departed, and we made our plans for the wedding across the ocean. 6 months later, my children and I traveled to Vientiane. The wedding was a big event with Buddhist monks present, and it took place over several days. After wedding, I came home with my new bride. I learned later that my kids told Clara that I had married a girl from Laos. Sophie and Keith told me she cried a lot, and she was very sad for weeks. Lovemaking with Nina was amazing. We gave ourselves to each other completely. We both knew what it was to have loved and lost, and we didn't waste any time or energy on anything but expressing our love to each other. The months rolled on. By the time of my company's Christmas party, my bride was 5 months pregnant, and she was still a stunningly beautiful woman. She was dressed in a holiday dress that showed off her legs and her increasingly swollen bust, but, mostly, hid her rapidly swelling belly. And her husband Jim congratulated us at the company party. Our first daughter's name was Nancy, named after my mother. 1 year later, we had another beautiful daughter, whom we named Tara. Nina communicated with her family and her friend on Skype. My grandmother died, and she left me some money. After discussing it with Nina, we decided to move into my old home so as to have room for our growing family. Clara accepted my buyout offer. Sophie was almost done with high school by then and wanted to live with us until her graduation. Clara was frankly relieved, as she and Sophie had not gotten on very well since the divorce. Clara had confessed to her a couple years before that the reason for the divorce was that she had cheated on me. Sophie called her a 304 and didn't speak to her for months. Eventually, normalcy returned, but Sophie was forever rather cool towards Clara after that. For his part, when Keith found out the circumstances of our divorce, he was angry at her, but acknowledged that she was his mother and forgave her more quickly. In any event, I bought out Clara and she bought a nice condo for herself. Keith and I assisted Clara in moving to the condo, and she thanked me. Sophie went to the grandparents instead of assisting her mother. I no longer had any hate in my heart for Clara. I was simply neutral towards her. My heart was filled with love for Nina and my 4 children. I would have liked Sophie to have fully forgiven her mother, but it wasn't my place to put pressure on her. I did tell her that her mother loved her and had been a good mother to her, and that both of them would be happier if she could someday forgive her. My love for Nina grew, as did hers for me. Sophie moved out, on to college, and my little ones grew. The years went on. My eldest children graduated from college and got jobs locally. My little ones grew fast. I didn't keep up too much with Clara, but I know she dated some, but never got too serious. At one point, she seemed to be getting serious with a guy, and he moved into her condo. It turned out that this man was an abuser. He kicked my ex-wife down the stairs, breaking her leg and arm. The man was arrested, and Clara was hospitalized. Keith visited his mother, and he telephoned me. He told me Clara cried all day because her daughter did not visit her. I told Nina what Keith had told me. Nina was angry. She visited Sophie and told her that she had to go to see her mother. Confronted with her behavior and her duty to her mother, Sophie broke down and cried. Nina held her and soothed her and told her that it was time to make peace with Clara. I took Sophie to the hospital. We arrived at her ward. When she saw us, she began to cry from pleasure. She thanked me for bringing our daughter. Sophie and Clara wept and forgave each other. I left the room. Later, I returned and Sophie went to the bathroom. Clara asked if I could forgive her. I told her I could and I did. She cried a lot again, but those tears were tears of relief and happiness. I told her that I hoped for her future happiness and that I had found mine with Nina and my children. My daughter returned to the room and promised she would visit her again soon. About a year later, my daughter was getting married. The wedding was a huge event. Our 2 young daughters were very excited because they were the flower girls. I walked Sophie down the aisle to her fiancé. Keith walked his mother and Nina to their seats. Clara and I were polite with one another, but I tried to avoid her without being obvious about it. I had forgiven her, but I just could never totally forget her betrayal. She talked much with Nina, however. Nina told me later Clara was very friendly with her. At one point, late in the evening, as the party was winding down, long after my youngest daughters had been taken away by the babysitters, Clara approached me as I sat at a table with Nina and my old neighbor, Diane. Disregarding propriety, she told me in a sad voice, "Grant, I can see how much you and Nina love each other. It makes me sad for what we will never have again, all because of a stupid mistake on my part. You look so good, so young, so alive and vibrant, and I'm just an aging, lonely woman now." Taken aback, I had an inspiration. "Clara, I guess I'm living proof that, after you've been cheated on, that different gyms do train the body better." Diane reddened. Clara just looked at me confused, and Nina, to whom I had told the story of Diane's attempted seduction of me so many years before, jumped up into my lap, hugging me tight and kissing me. "That is true, my love, but don't look for any other gyms than mine for the rest of your life," Nina said, and I didn't. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Ben Harris. I'm a 42-year-old manager at a construction firm in Los Angeles. I met my wife, Kathy, 12 years ago when she was 21, working as a file clerk just outside my office. What caught my attention first were the tight jeans she wore that hugged her hips perfectly. She was young, attractive, and left quite an impression. At the time, I had been divorced from my first wife for about 4 years and had no children. I always wanted kids, though, and with Kathy working nearby and handling the project files, it felt like things just fell into place. We started having lunch together, and after a few weeks, I invited her to spend the weekend with me. It was a great weekend. Good company, good chemistry, and we started dating seriously after that. A couple of months passed before Kathy told me she was pregnant. I was excited but also direct. I asked her if she wanted an abortion or if she wanted to get married. She didn't want an abortion, so the next weekend, we had a small, private wedding. I was thrilled. At 30, I felt ready to start a family, to be a dad, and I wanted to be young enough to enjoy every part of my kids' lives. But something shifted in Kathy after that. She became quiet, withdrawn, and pregnancy was not something she enjoyed. At the time, I thought maybe it was just the strain of carrying a child, but I later realized it was more than that. Kathy had married me not because she wanted to build a family, but to escape her mother's house. She had no real interest in having children and had even aborted 2 pregnancies from a previous relationship. That was something I didn't learn until much later. About 3 months before the birth of our first son, Kathy quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and prepare for motherhood. Our second and third sons arrived shortly after, and within 3.5 years, we had 3 healthy, energetic boys. With 3 young kids to look after, Kathy was constantly busy and often exhausted by the time I got home from work. I truly appreciated her dedication as a mom, but as her energy for parenting increased, her desire for intimacy seemed to fade. The gradual decline in our physical relationship left me feeling a bit on edge. I noticed that Kathy's attitude began to change when she turned 30. The kids were now all in grade school, and I had assumed Kathy would be able to relax a bit more and pay more attention to me. Unfortunately, our sex life continued to remain at a low ebb. I never really knew what Kathy was doing during the day with the kids in school. I looked back at what my mom used to do: cleaning the house, doing the laundry, shopping for food and the kids' clothes, taking the kids to soccer practice. I assumed Kathy's day would be pretty much the same as what I had seen my mom do. One day, Kathy approached me after dinner and told me she would like to find a part-time job. She said she was getting bored staying at home by herself during the day. I was a little concerned because I didn't see how she could make lunches, get the kids off to school, clean house, do the laundry, take the kids to soccer practice, go shopping, and still find the time for a job. I was worried that her health may suffer from plain exhaustion. Kathy spent a few weeks looking, and then by word of mouth found a part-time job as a bookkeeper for a small local gym. She told me that she would be given a free membership and would only work from 8 a.m. until noon. This would allow her to get the kids off to school and come home after work to do the necessary chores before the kids got home. She told me that if there was ever an emergency at school, the school could reach her at work, and she would only be 10 minutes away. Kathy's appeared to have thought this out carefully, and I could find no flaw in her logic. So I told her, go for it. Kathy started work and seemed to get an emotional lift from having to interface with adults at work. Things seemed to settle into a well-established routine, and Kathy's demeanor substantially improved. A few months after she started work, Kathy approached me with a request to take advantage of the gym's free membership. She wanted to go to the gym early in the morning from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. to exercise, then come back home to get the kids off to school, and then head off to work at 8 a.m. Because of my commute, I had to leave the house at 6:30 a.m., so I really didn't see any conflict with the family's overall schedule. A few months went by and I began to notice Kathy getting her old figure back. She had dropped 20 pounds and was now carrying 120 pounds on her 5 feet minus 4 inches frame. When I complimented her on her efforts, she surprised me by telling me she felt her boobs were too small. She told me she wanted breast enhancements to make her boobs perky again. I realized after having 3 kids, she deserved the implants, especially if it would improve our stale sex life. Kathy got her implants, and it took her a couple of weeks to fully recover. Apparently, the surgeon inserted the implants through her armpits to make them look and feel more realistic. He did a very good job, and she was ecstatic with the results. Kathy again returned to her part-time job and early morning workouts. Things got back into the groove of everyday family life. But that was soon to change dramatically. It was early Saturday morning and I was cleaning out Kathy's car. As I took out the floor mat on the driver's side, I noticed a small cellophane bag underneath the car seat. I pulled out the small bag and noticed it was partially filled with white powder. I had no idea what was in the bag, but the possibility that the bag contained drugs crossed my mind. I began to get an uneasy feeling. Where would Kathy get drugs? Could the drugs belong to a friend? What in the hell was going on? What was Kathy doing during the day? I decided not to tell Kathy what I had found. I needed time to think things out and talk to an old friend who lived life walking on the fence. If the substance in the bag was a drug, my bud Timothy would know. That afternoon, I asked Kathy if she could take the kids to their soccer games because I needed to get an oil change for my car. I told her I would be back in a couple hours. I left the house and headed across town to Timothy's apartment. Just as I was about to knock on Timothy's door, the door opened and Timothy bent down to grab his newspaper. It had been a couple of years and Timothy was surprised to see me. I told him the kids, family life, and weekend soccer games was keeping me busy and chasing skirts with my old single buds was probably not practical. When he laughed, I told him I needed a favor. He told me, that's what friends are for. I entered his apartment and I showed him what I had found under Kathy's car seat. He opened the bag, wet his index finger, and tapped the white substance. He brought out a small amount on his fingertip, looked at it, and touched it to his tongue. Timothy casually said, "Meth?" I stood there stunned. What was Kathy doing with meth? And who had given it to her? I must have looked bewildered, for Timothy told me to sit down. Timothy saw the look in my face and asked me about Kathy. I told him she was working part-time as a bookkeeper at a local gym. He laughed and said, "Gyms were a haven for drugs. Steroids, meth, and cocaine were the usual suspects, and the most trainers wind up banging their housewife clients. It is very common." But he mentioned this may just be the tip of the iceberg of Kathy's shenanigans. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach. I think Timothy saw the blood drain from my face. Timothy looked at me and said, "You need to hire a PI. They will be discreet and are professionals. If you follow her and find her having sex with some guy, what are you going to do? Punch the guy out and get arrested for battery. And you may even lose the fight and give him a get-out-of-jail-free card to beat the hell out of you claiming self-defense? Punch her out and get arrested for felony spousal abuse? You're the one who would go to jail, and you're the one who would suffer as Big Bubas's bitch. All you would do is leave the door wide open for Kathy to continue her affair, and she would probably have the guy move into your home while you were in jail. When you got out, you would have nothing. California is a no-fault state, so her adultery would be ignored. But it gets worse. If you could not support her and your kids because you were incarcerated, the courts would take your 401k and retirement funds to use for spousal and child support. And remember, there is nothing to stop you wife from using those funds to support her lover. You would have effectively thrown away your life up to this point. When you are finally released from prison, you would carry the stigma of being an ex-con to every potential employer you contact. Unless you can start your own business, which is highly unlikely, you will be forced to take a job, if you can even find one, at a fraction of the pay of your current position. Timothy went on, "We have been friends for a long time, so I want you to hire a PI, and I want you to bring me all the information he finds. If she is taking drugs, you need to get her into a rehab facility for the sake of your children and the stability of their home. However, if she has committed adultery and you have done nothing to encourage that particular behavior, then she has lost respect for you and has disregarded the welfare of her children. If that is the case, you will never gain back her respect, and you need to take the kind of action that will allow you to walk away from this situation with your pride and your balls intact. No woman is ever sorry she cheated on her husband. She is only sorry that she got caught. A woman who is unfaithful fully intended her actions. She knew exactly what she is doing. It is a selfish act that totally disregards the feelings of her husband and family. And remember, the next time for her gets easier and easier. However, if she was drugged, then she was not cheating, but she was involuntarily assaulted." Timothy continued, "Women are different than men. From their late 20s to their late 30s, women's hormones are running wild. They are at the same runaway hormone level as an 18-year-old guy. Any woman who has been married for a few years and hits that cycle is looking for a new sex partner. Whether they successfully find it is another question. With the divorce rate in the Los Angeles basin at 65%, with 85% instigated by the wife, for first marriages and 80% for second marriages, and with an overall female infidelity rate of 50%, equates to a lot of wives screwing on their first and second husbands with no remorse. It appears that few women learn their lesson, but most continue their infidelity in subsequent marriages. Remember, not only does it get easier and easier, but the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill until you have to mow the lawn. Well, Ben, that is why I stayed single. I just saw too much in my line of work as a PI. With the divorce laws the way they are, men, in general, are fighting an uphill battle. And remember, Ben, it is a war to get the upper hand. Men don't marry partners. They marry adversaries and spend the rest of their lives suffering in silence." I left Timothy's apartment that afternoon shaken to the core. I took the business card of the PI Timothy handed me. I would call the PI Monday. I wasn't going to be emotional and mentally abused by anyone's runaway hormones. 2 weeks later, I stared in disbelief at the PI's report. Apparently, Kathy was meeting a trainer from the gym during her early morning workout. They had a routine worked out where they met at 4:30 a.m., spent a half hour screwing in the back of her car, and then went in for a workout when the gym opened at 5 a.m. It had never occurred to me to check what time the gym opened. I felt like an idiot. I had trusted her, and she had deceived me and the kids. I was not sad, nor was I heartbroken. I was experiencing ice-cold rage. The trainer turned out to be a small-time drug dealer who dealt in steroids and meth. I called Timothy and told him I would be stopping by with the PI's report. The drive through crosstown traffic was miserable. 45 minutes later, I was ringing Timothy's door. Timothy opened the door, invited me in, and motioned me to sit down. Timothy slowly digested the PI's report and gently handed it back to me. He told me to listen very carefully. First, Timothy said, you must not do anything that will make her suspicious. It is imperative that she does not suspect you know anything. This coming Monday, I want you to. I work early Monday around 4:15 a.m. Kathy was just getting out of the shower and went over to put on her gym shorts and top. I wondered if she was even wearing panties. Probably not. I lay in our bed pretending to be asleep. Once she went downstairs, I quietly got out of bed, slipped into my clothes and waited until I heard the garage door open. I heard the garage door close and I quickly went downstairs, put on my gloves, grabbed my camera with a telephoto lens, and went into the garage. I opened the truck to my car and pulled out Kathy's original plastic bag and 2 additional plastic bags of meth that Timothy had given me on my last visit. I took the bags and my camera, laid them on the passenger seat of my car, opened the garage and headed down the road towards Kathy's gym. As I approached the gym, I killed my lights and parked about 50 yards away from the gym's parking lot. I picked up my camera, the 3 bags of plastic, and exited the car. As I approached the parking lot under the cover of the bushes, I noticed Kathy's car parked a slot away from an older Ford Bronco. I couldn't see anyone in the Bronco, but I did notice some movement in the backseat of Kathy's car. I crept up to the Bronco and slowly opened the driver's door and tossed 2 of the plastic bags into the passenger's seat. I then kept low and snuck around the front of the Bronco and tossed the last plastic bag on the ground by the backseat of Kathy's car. I looked up and I could see Kathy's head by the far window. She getting pounded doggy style by a male I had never met. I assumed it was her trainer. I crept back out of the parking lot and went around the corner. I pulled out the untraceable cell phone I had purchased with 30 minutes of time and dialed 911. I gave the operator a fake name, the address of the gym, and told her that I was witnessing a rape and child abduction in progress. I told her the male suspect may be armed. I ran across the street and hid in the bushes poised with my camera and telephoto lens. In less than 3.5 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up without their sirens and with their headlights off. Simultaneously, they drove into the parking lot and turned on their headlights on the 2 cars. The cops opened their squad car doors and stood behind them with their guns drawn. I could hear the cops through the bullhorn telling the occupants of the car to exit the vehicle now with their hands on top of their head. An unknown male emerged first wearing only his boxer shorts. Kathy, still topless, came out next wearing her gym shorts. Both occupants were told to turn around and place their hands against the car. 2 cops, under the cover of the other 2 cops, approached Kathy and her friend, grabbed their hands one at a time, and handcuffed their hands behind their back. I saw one cop bend down and pick up a plastic bag. He then showed it to the other cop and motioned for the other 2 backup cops to come over. 2 of the cops went over to the Bronco and opened both front doors. One cop came back holding 2 additional plastic bags. The cops conversed for a couple of minutes, ran a check on the license plates of the 2 cars, and checked the driver licenses they had found in Kathy's car and the Bronco. Although I didn't have much light, I was snapping pictures as fast as I could. I then saw the cops take Kathy and put her in the backseat of one squad car, and her friend went into the backseat of the other squad car. Then the squad cars drove away. I headed back to my car and drove home. When I got home, the kids were still asleep. 6 o'clock came around, so I woke the kids up to get them ready for school. At 7:30 a.m., I drove the kids to school. I thought to myself that I was doing a pretty good job as Mr. Mom. I drove home and called my boss to let him know I would not be coming in that day. About 11 a.m., I got a collect call from a sobbing Kathy telling me she needed to be bailed out of jail. She and her trainer had been arrested at the gym for possession of an illegal substance. I said I would find out what her bail was and see what I could do. She was crying as she hung up. I called my attorney and told him I wanted to file for divorce that week and to request supervised visits for Kathy. I also wanted him to obtain a restraining order against Kathy to stay away from the kids and not come within 100 yards of my home. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. I walked over to my liquor cabinet, took out my bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label, and poured about half my glass. I went into the living room and, as I looked at her smiling photo, I quietly said, "You filthy 304, you can rot in jail. You will never come back to my home." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Ex-wife cheated, got an STD, and now she's desperate for help after I became rich and successful. You've emerged victorious while I've suffered defeat. You walk away with property, money, and an upgraded partner. The hotel room is yours tonight, along with the arrangements I've made. Please don't return the gift. It would only remind you of your deceit. I'm driving home and have no desire to see you, him, or your associates again. Let me know when your team will collect your belongings. Anything unnecessary will be packed away, symbolizing the mess of our marriage. To quote my father in the Air Force, "Yay for me and screw you. I'm done serving you. Enjoy your journey. Your acting skills have earned it." 10 years later on a Wednesday morning, I awoke to banging. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I checked the clock. 8:15 a.m. The noise persisted now at my front door. Who would knock at this hour? I slipped into my robe and slippers, heading downstairs where the knocking grew louder. Peering through the peephole, I saw a disheveled woman. Opening the door, prepared to scold her, I recognized her, older, thinner, her once vibrant hair now tinged with gray. She smelled, her dress worn. She resembled homeless Daisy, who often lurked in the streets or underpasses. In disbelief, I questioned the woman who had once been my wife. "Yes, Mike, it's me. Can I come inside?" she pleaded desperately. "By the way, that's me, Mike Carpenter." "No," I replied, slamming the door in her face. Just then, another knock echoed, accompanied by her sobs. "Please, Mike, I'm begging you, open the door." I flung the door open to prevent further pounding, but remained in the doorway to block her entry. The neighbors already viewed me as peculiar. I didn't want to attract more attention by making a scene on the doorstep. "What do you want? I made it clear 10 years ago that I never want to see you again. Never. What part of that didn't you understand? And why are you here? I thought you and Dr. Wonderful were living in Milwaukee." Regaining composure, Daisy wiped her tears and cast me the most longing glance I'd ever witnessed. "Can I come in? I'm hungry, tired, and need to use the restroom." "Please, I'll explain later," she implored, her feet shifting uneasily. With my experience as a teacher, I recognized the telltale signs of imminent urgency. I didn't want her relieving herself on my porch, so I reluctantly swung the door open, gesturing her inside with a silent invitation. "You remember where the bathroom is?" I scolded, a reminder that we once shared this home. "Hurry up." "Thanks," Daisy said, entering. She dropped her suitcase and dashed to the downstairs bathroom. I closed the door, went upstairs for a quick bathroom break, and returned downstairs, finding her still in the bathroom. I went to the kitchen, fired up my Keurig, and brewed coffee. By then, Daisy had returned. "Can I have a cup?" she pleaded. I paused. Torn between anger and restraint, I couldn't slap a woman, and I didn't want trouble. "Yeah, I'm not heartless," I replied, "but I'm not your servant either." So I relented, partly out of curiosity. "I don't have fancy stuff," I said, offering milk and sugar. "Black's fine," Daisy said gratefully. I handed her the cup, watching her trembling hands. "Why are you here?" I asked. "I've got nowhere else to go," she finally admitted. "I used up my last dime on cab fare." "What happened to your beloved Dr. Bruce?" I quipped sarcastically. "Dr. Bruce?" "It fell apart," she stuttered, avoiding my gaze. If my sarcasm had been any sharper, you could have sliced tile with it. I noticed her flinch. After the divorce, we tied the knot, but things soured when Bruce faced a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. Both of us lost our jobs and medical licenses, and we ended up losing everything. Bruce became abusive, blaming me for our situation. "One day I caught him cheating," Daisy tearfully recounted. "So he got a taste of his own medicine," I remarked wryly, remembering our own past drama. "But karma's a kicker, not fun." Daisy whimpered. "Just like it wasn't funny when you publicly tore me apart on our anniversary." I reminded her. "Do you realize it's the 10th anniversary of that night?" "No, I didn't know," Daisy murmured. "Did you report him to the cops?" I asked, showing some compassion. "No, too scared. But I did divorce him. Unfortunately, I was left with next to nothing after the split," Daisy explained. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." "What's your play here?" I questioned. "Sympathy? You might find it in the dictionary between crap and chiropractor. I despise you. I loathe you as intensely as I once adored you," I snarled. "Now that your world's crumbling, you come crawling back to me. Where are your parents and friends now?" "They've all abandoned me," Daisy sobbed. "No surprises there," I scoffed bitterly. "Did you and the idiot have kids?" "No, never did. Turns out Bruce is infertile. For some reason he blames me for that too," she spat bitterly. "At least the gene pool's safe from you too," I remarked wryly. "Guess something good came from that mess." She wrinkled her nose at me. "What happened to you, Mike? You used to be so caring, so kind." Anger morphed into fury and I squeezed my eyes shut. "You want to know what happened? Look in the mirror. You happened. Thanks to you, I'm incapable of love and trust." "The nice guy finished last," I growled. "But I thought you'd move on, find someone else," Daisy wheezed wide-eyed. "Get real. After what you did, you never once hinted I was just a fallback for you. I thought we had something solid, but you lied. 13 damn years, 10 as husband and wife. Do you think I can trust anyone after that?" I took a deep breath. "And how many women do you think would want damaged goods?" "Not that there was a line," I muttered to myself. Still, not a single one came along. So, are you surprised I've turned into a recluse after a decade of licking my wounds? I suppose not, Daisy admitted sheepishly, lowering her gaze. And here you are. What do you want from me, shelter? Care while you wait for Prince Charming to stroll back in? I hoped you'd let me stay just until I get back on my feet, she pleaded. There's a shelter downtown, I pointed out. That's what they're for. That's where my taxes go, to keep people like you off the streets. I tried, but they were full, Daisy confessed. Even the YWCA and the big church downtown had no room. Please, Mike, I'm begging you. I'll do anything, cook, clean, whatever you need. I wanted to lash out, but I held back, glaring at her. She visibly recoiled. What makes you think I'd want you near me? To me, you're contaminated, a walking hazard, I hissed. And then it dawned on me. You've been attempting to sell yourself, I remarked. She lowered her head shyly, tears dripping onto the table as she nodded. How do I appear? No takers, she questioned. I studied her closely before replying. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Perhaps I should depart. Perhaps I should simply fade away and perish in some, Daisy cried. No one desires me anyhow. I watched her sobbing at the kitchen table, feeling a mix of anger and pity. Despite my strong hatred for her, seeing her like this after all these years was jarring. And then there was Bruce, the dirtbag who had taken her from me to mistreat her. My contempt for him was growing. Raised never to use violence against women, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Taking a reluctant breath, I suggested we eat first. Daisy agreed, expressing her hunger. I prepared scrambled eggs and bacon, recalling how Daisy used to make them. Her eyes lit up when I served her, grateful for the cheese on the eggs. As she ate voraciously, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. When she finished, she thanked me for the meal and praised my cooking. She declined more food but asked for another cup of coffee. Sure, I replied, taking her cup. When I returned, she sipped her coffee and seemed to feel better, a little. The food helped, she admitted. Good. The shower might help more, I suggested bluntly. No offense, but you stink. Daisy's face fell. I'm sorry, can I use your shower, please? You know where it is, I said. Towels are where they always are. My robe will be on the door. Don't put it back on after your shower. You can use the washer and dryer for your clothes. As she disappeared into the bathroom, I grumbled about cleaning, then washed dishes, went upstairs to get ready, and reflected on Daisy's departure with Bruce, the betrayal that devastated me. Counseling helped, and I poured my feelings into writing, eventually publishing a book about my experience, bringing some closure. Another factor in maintaining my sanity was my involvement in martial arts. Initially, two senseis urged me to quit due to my intensity during sparring. However, I found guidance from a retired Marine at the community center. Unlike others, he remained composed during our sessions, teaching me to channel my emotions into controlled strikes rather than letting them dictate my actions. It was a challenging skill to master, as evidenced by the bruises I accumulated. Meeting Daisy again took me by surprise, especially seeing her health decline. I wondered if she was sick. Oddly, my anger shifted toward Bruce. Even though I initially wanted to push Daisy away, I hesitated. What if something happened to her? Could I handle the aftermath? The idea of worsening my emotional state and facing potential legal issues wasn't appealing. I decided to get another perspective and called my mom. Morning, Mike, she greeted cheerfully. What's on your mind? Skipping the usual chit-chat, I blurted out, guess who showed up this morning? Now you got me curious. Who? She asked. Daisy, I confessed. I heard her sigh. What's the deal? What does she want? She probed. I recounted Daisy's situation and what she told me. Mom, she looks awful. My gut says I should kick her out, but... You'd regret it if something happened to her, Mom predicted, echoing my worry. Yeah, you're probably right. Plus, she treated Bruce terribly, I added. I know she hurt you deeply, Mom acknowledged, but maybe hearing her out is the wise move. How about I come over later? Knowing Mom's talent for unraveling things, I agreed. Sounds good, Mom. Your input would be invaluable. Let me handle it for now, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it, I expressed gratefully. We wrapped up our chat, and I tended to my chores. Slipping into my usual summer gear of a tee and jeans, I went downstairs. Daisy had already started laundry, wearing my old robe and slippers as she waited for me in the living room. I didn't bother to check if she had anything on underneath. The robe was tightly tied, showing dark stains on her legs. Though she smelled better, she didn't look any better. Want a coffee refill? I offered. Yes, please, she accepted. Pouring another cup, I joined her as she sipped. Her shaky hands caught my eye. Thanks, she mumbled. I'll leave once my clothes are done, she added. No hurry, I assured her. I do have some questions if you don't mind, I continued. Sure, Daisy agreed. Bruce faced malpractice claims. Weren't doctors like him insured? I asked. They were, but it turned into a class action. Even though most claims were baseless, the insurance refused coverage due to many judgments against him, Daisy clarified. Some claims were proven true? I probed. The unproven ones were dismissed due to lack of evidence, she explained. But the damage was done. We lost our jobs and licenses. Didn't you have 401 Ks? I questioned. Surprised. Yes, we did. We lived off them for a year, paying hefty penalties, but we lost everything, Daisy lamented. What's Bruce doing now? I chuckled, recalling his earlier dreams. He works as a parking attendant, making about $16 an hour, she revealed. And your plans? I redirected. I thought about office work in the medical field. Despite losing my nursing license, I'm hopeful, Daisy replied quietly. Best of luck, I offered. Transportation and housing, I pressed. I can take the bus or walk, she sighed. I'll figure something out, but it takes money, she acknowledged. And you don't have any, I noted. Expected me to support you until you bounce back, huh? I took a gamble with the question. Yes, Daisy admitted. I get I'm not owed anything, but I hoped, given what I sacrificed in the divorce, you might show some kindness. My infatuation blinded me to your struggles. Now I see assuming was a mistake. You're right, I don't owe you, I affirmed. She seemed defeated, but I sighed and added, but I'm not heartless. You clearly need help. My mom's on her way. She wants to talk before I decide. Of course, Daisy replied, visibly relieved. Your mom's always meant a lot to me and she adored you, I noted. Then, unexpectedly, she said, despite it all, Mom still cared for you. Cared? Daisy asked, surprised. Yes. So you need to be brutally honest with her, understand? I do, I promise, honesty, Daisy assured. And Mike? What? I asked. Thank you, genuinely, for everything, Daisy expressed. Hold off on the thanks, I cautioned. Just then, the doorbell rang. I peeked through the peephole, seeing my mom, so I greeted her with a hug as I let her in. Daisy, goodness, has it really been 10 years? My mom exclaimed, spotting Daisy in my old robe. Both women hugged and exchanged kisses. It's nice to see you again, Lorraine, Daisy replied. Mike, dear, why don't you give us some girl time? My mom suggested. Knowing she wanted privacy, I headed to my home office, closing the door. I surfed the web, looking into the malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Bruce Williams. After some searching, I stumbled upon troubling information. Bruce had reportedly diagnosed around 97% of his 2,000 patients with epilepsy over 4 years. However, many children were misdiagnosed or over-medicated, leading to unnecessary treatments and procedures. Daisy was often implicated as an accomplice. The hospital had to refund $300,000 for improper billing, prompting their termination and license revocation. Reading this, I was appalled. Bruce seemed to be the ringleader, with Daisy following his lead. My mother interrupted, expressing concern about Daisy's health and suggesting a visit to Dr. McGregor. Her grave tone weighed heavily on me. Terry McGregor had been our family doctor for years, and Mom had worked for him until retiring recently. Why, Mom? I pondered. I can't diagnose, but I've seen many cancer cases in women. I bet she needs urgent medical attention, but she didn't stop there. I know Daisy has strained your bond, and I understand, Mom admitted. But if she's dealing with health issues, we should help. It's the right thing. She gave me a small, lopsided smile. I never said being a Christian was easy, did I? Plus, Michael James Carpenter, your father and I didn't raise you to be cold-hearted, did we? I wrinkled my nose, returning her smile, and shook my head. So, she went on, I called Dr. McGregor. He'll see her today and run tests. If they find anything, they'll refer her to a specialist and assist with Medicaid. She'll change, and I'll drive her, Mom decided. You can't afford that, I objected. Here, take this. I handed her 2 $100 bills. Thanks, Mike. You're a good son, she acknowledged. Just so we're clear, I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it because of the values you taught me. That doesn't mean I forgive her or take her back, I asserted firmly. Got it, Mom replied quietly. An awkward silence hung in the air. Did she mention that idiot Bruce assaulted her? I finally asked. Yes, she did, Mom confirmed, her face neutral, her voice steady. I nodded briskly. That scoundrel needs consequences, I thought. Another tense silence followed. Keep me updated, I instructed. I will, Mom assured, kissing my forehead before leaving. Exiting my office, I saw Daisy in a different outfit, still worn but clean. Thanks for breakfast, she murmured timidly. You're welcome, I replied stiffly. After they left, I locked up and grabbed more coffee, researching Wisconsin's laws on spousal abuse. Sadly, I found the time limit for prosecution was discouraging. Unsure of when Bruce attacked Daisy, I doubted the authorities could act. Feeling frustrated, I briefly considered taking matters into my own hands. To clear my head, I changed and rode my stationary bike, pushing myself through a tough workout. Over the years, I had gone from unfit to fit, sticking to a regular exercise routine. Afterward, feeling refreshed, I showered, dressed, and had a light lunch while catching up on the news. By the time I listened to Mom's message, it was mid-afternoon. "Was wondering where you guys were," I said as I answered the phone. "Just finished with Dr. McGregor," Mom replied wearily. Judging by her tone, Daisy wasn't nearby. "Any updates?" I asked. "McGregor's concerned about Daisy. Test results suggest cervical cancer. He's arranged an appointment with an oncologist for Friday. She's applied for Medicaid and emergency aid. McGregor also suspects physical abuse," Mom disclosed. "We're aware," I acknowledged. She mentioned not eating. Mom continued, her concern evident. "But McGregor thinks it's more severe, lacking essential nutrients." Seeing her worry, I nodded. "It's late. I'll take her for a meal. Grab essentials in her suitcase. She should stay with me. We need to talk," Mom suggested. "Sounds like a plan," I agreed. "Keep me posted." "Love you," Mom said. "Love you too," I replied. About 3 hours later, they were on their way. We settled in the study while Daisy packed. "Sorry for the delay," Mom began. "No worries," I said. "What's the plan?" "Caring for Daisy till her appointment. She still cares for you. Wanted you to know," Mom explained. "No reconciliation, not after her lies and infidelity," I said firmly. "Understood," Mom replied. "She thinks she can win you back," Mom revealed. "Out of the question," I asserted. "Besides, I've changed." "I miss the old you," Mom admitted. "Can you join us for dinner on Friday?" she asked. "I'll make lasagna." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Your lasagna always brings a smile." We hugged and returned to the front room where Daisy was waiting with her suitcase. "I'll stay with your mom, if that's okay," she said weakly. "That's up to her," I replied, noticing my mom's expression. "Thanks for breakfast and for listening," Daisy said tearfully. "You're welcome," I nodded. "Don't forget about dinner on Friday," my mom reminded unnecessarily. "I'll be there, I promise," I assured her. Over the next 2 days, I kept busy with work and household chores. With school out for summer, I had to tackle curriculum planning and home maintenance. I trusted my mom to take care of Daisy, knowing her resourcefulness in navigating challenges. Finally, Friday arrived. After a shower, I picked up wine and headed to my mom's for lasagna. Arriving at 6:15, Daisy greeted me and led me inside. Mom was busy in the kitchen, and Daisy appeared on the verge of tears. I thanked Daisy as I entered the kitchen, and Mom's face lit up at the sight of the wine. We sat down to enjoy the meal, though Daisy seemed visibly distressed. "How did things go today?" I finally inquired. "We managed to get Daisy's application approved," Mom reported. "Thank goodness for this new-fangled internet system. I wish they'd had it when I retired." Observing her forced optimism, I sought reassurance. "So Daisy's medical costs will be covered?" "Yes, and she'll get a monthly allowance from the state. Since she'll be living here, she won't need much," Mom confirmed. "They're pursuing child support, but it's like squeezing blood from a turnip," I muttered grimly. "That's good," I replied. "And the oncologist?" Daisy's expression darkened, signaling ominous news. "They found stage 4 cervical cancer," Mom disclosed. "It's spreading rapidly throughout her body." "Can it be treated?" I asked, grappling with mixed emotions. "Maybe," Mom responded cautiously, with Daisy's consent. They continued. "Survival odds are less than 20%. Treatment's an option, but no guarantees," Mom explained. "Doctors think it started out 4 years ago," Daisy admitted tearfully. "If caught. Earlier, my chances would have been over 90%. "That's terrible. Bruce didn't notice anything," I probed. "No, he never mentioned it," Daisy explained. "I noticed some changes, but I didn't want to worry him." "What kind of changes?" I asked delicately. "Closeness became painful," Daisy confessed. "We stopped altogether for a while." Redirecting the conversation, I said, "New medications might help." "Yes," Mom added. "They could improve her odds by 10 or 15%. "What's your plan?" I asked Daisy. "Fight. I'm not ready to give up," she declared. "And how long will treatment last?" I questioned Mom. "Up to a year, maybe longer," she replied. "Will Daisy stay here?" I pressed. "I think it's best. I'll care for her," Mom assured. Reluctantly, I agreed. "I suppose that makes sense. Can you handle this?" Mom asked. I glanced at Daisy, recalling our history. Memories flooded back of her callous actions with Bruce. Daisy noticed my change in demeanor. "I know you don't trust me, but," she started. "Understatement," I sharply interjected. "If you injure my mother or cause trouble, I'll kick you out, cancer or not. Understand?" "Yes," Daisy replied quietly, tears welling. Mom intervened, suggesting dessert. I can help, I offered, but Mom declined. You two could use some time alone, she said, leaving. Daisy wiped her face. I started reading your book, she said. Was I that terrible? I have footage from that night, I revealed. Would you like to see it? Daisy declined, stunned. No wonder you despise me, she said, sobbing. It's all in the book, I continued. I imagined revenge for years. Daisy was horrified. Yolanda suggested exercise, Mom added, bringing apple pie. That's why you look so good now? Daisy asked. Yes, I confirmed. I've been doing martial arts and fitness. But you're still angry, Daisy observed. It's better, Mom reassured. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have even come through the door. I'm truly sorry, Mike. I really am. I knew it would hurt, but I didn't anticipate it would devastate you like this. That's why I gave you everything in the divorce. I thought it would aid in your recovery. When you didn't contest it, I assumed you'd be all right, Daisy explained. To be honest, my lawyer was taken aback when he saw your petition. He urged me to sign it swiftly, fearing you might reconsider, I confessed. Have you dated anyone since then? Daisy asked tentatively. Not really, I replied bluntly. Just a couple of drunken one-night stands, but that's about it. I don't even recall their names. I noticed my mother's eyebrows shoot up, a look of disgust crossing her face, but she held back her thoughts. At that moment, I didn't care about her reaction. Oh God, Daisy sighed. I don't know what to say. A sorry won't be enough, will it? No, I replied bitterly. We ate pie in silence, Daisy's hurt evident, and I avoided, looking at Mom's face. After saying goodbye, Mom walked me to the door where I spoke quietly. Are you sure you're doing the right thing, Mom? I asked. What about her family? Can't they help? I called her parents and sister, but they refused to help, Mom replied sadly. What a screwed up family, I muttered. You didn't abandon me, I told Mom. Despite turning bitter, family takes care of family. I agree, Mom said tearfully. What are Daisy's chances really? I asked. Mom looked at Daisy before answering. It's hard to say. Progress has been made in treatment, but it's uncertain. A lot depends on her will to live. Ignoring that, I expressed concern for my mom's well-being. What if she does something behind your back? I worried. I know you don't trust her, but she's at rock bottom right now. People with nothing have nothing to lose, I reasoned. Be careful. If you need anything, let me know, I urged. I will, Mom promised. Thanks for dinner. I'll be in touch. Love you, I said. Love you too, son, Mom replied, kissing my cheek. Please try to keep your emotions in check, Mom requested. Don't push her further, she pleaded. I'll try, I sighed heavily. That's all I ask, Mom said, and I promise not to play matchmaker. Thank you, I smiled before leaving. The next 2 months flew by as I tackled home projects and prepared for the upcoming school year. On Fridays, I visited my mom's house for dinner. I witnessed Daisy's chemotherapy taking a toll, weakening her. Despite the treatment's intent to heal, it seemed ineffective in her case. By mid-August, she lost all her hair, donning a stylish chemo cap. While my feelings for her remained unchanged, I made an effort to be polite, mainly for my mom's peace of mind. Daisy began receiving deductions from Bruce's paycheck, albeit small. She opened a bank account, with Mom overseeing the funds. Daisy insisted on sharing with Mom for expenses. Mom agreed, setting aside 10% for emergencies. On the eve of the new school year, I arrived at Mom's house to find an unfamiliar car parked outside. The sight of Bruce triggered an unsettling feeling. Mom and Daisy seemed apprehensive. Bruce appeared disheveled, a stark contrast to his former self. The restrained part of my mind reacted with restrained aggression. Observing Bruce's decline, he lacked his previous commanding presence, appearing unkempt in dirty jeans and a shirt. Well, look who it is, the arrogant teacher, Bruce sneered arrogantly. My animosity towards him had peaked. Though I'd never been in a physical altercation before, my martial arts training had taught me to avoid fights whenever possible. Even if you emerge victorious, the repercussions can linger for a lifetime. What's your business here, Bruce? I asked icily. I want the money that woman took from me, he growled. Took? I thought the court mandated a portion of your income for alimony, I stated evenly, though my gaze probably conveyed my disdain. It's all the same. They seized my funds and now I'm facing eviction because I can't pay rent, Bruce hissed. Thanks to her, you had the money to travel here from Milwaukee, I pointed out. You could have used it for rent. Don't play games, teacher. Maybe I should have taught you a lesson 10 years ago, he threatened. She stopped me, insisted I treat you with respect for looking after her all those years, Bruce threatened. How about you leave and we pretend none of this happened, I suggested cautiously. raising my hands in an attempt to defuse the situation that could lead to a violent confrontation, leaving me with bruises and a few well-timed counterattacks. But he likely didn't know Daisy's condition. She was ill, battling cancer, and she needed support. Cancer, huh? Is that another one of her lies? Bruce scoffed, placing his soda and sandwich aside before producing a revolver from behind him. Funny, I happen to have the cure for that, he taunted, aiming the weapon at Daisy. Bruce, please, my mom pleaded, gesturing towards her phone on the table. The emergency operator likely heard our entire exchange. Please, I've already called the police, they're on their way. I began to position myself between Bruce and Daisy, but he swiftly directed the weapon toward me. Desperation was evident in his eyes. Mentally, I retreated. I hadn't come this far, survived this much, to be senselessly shot by a cop. Stay put, teacher. Not one move, Bruce warned, his hands trembling. In that instant, we spotted flashing red and blue lights outside the front window and heard a voice over the intercom. Mr. Williams, this is the police. The house is surrounded. We're aware you're armed. Drop your weapon and come out with your hands up, the officer instructed. You should listen, I warned Bruce, who stared wide-eyed. How did they know about my weapon? Bruce inquired. I informed them. I saw it tucked in your waistband, Mom disclosed. And Mike's right, follow their orders. This is your final chance, Mr. Williams. Surrender the weapon and exit the premises, the officer commanded through the speaker. Glancing at us, Bruce seemed to grow increasingly uneasy. Our eyes met briefly, and I noticed his resolve waver. If you were wise, you'd comply, I advised. There won't be another warning. As the back door opened, 2 officers suddenly appeared in the room, pistols drawn, aimed at Bruce. Drop your weapons, one ordered. Bruce turned, eyes widening as he realized he was facing 2 loaded weapons. Recklessly, he raised his firearm, but the officers fired first. Despite the ringing in my ears, Daisy's scream pierced through, shocking me. 2 more officers entered the room as my mom reacted, clutching an heirloom. Frozen, I watched as officers attended to Daisy and my wounded mom, while 2 others knelt beside Bruce. 1. Officer confirmed Bruce's death, leaving me shaken. Despite feeling a mix of relief and resentment, I steadied my mom. Paramedics arrived, determining Bruce's fate and attending to Daisy. I offered to accompany my mom to the hospital. At the crime scene, detectives took our statement and advised us to leave. They assured us of securing the house and provided a cleaning service recommendation. Driving to the hospital, my mind spun with conflicting emotions. At the hospital, we navigated bureaucracy, eventually settling in the waiting area for Daisy's surgery. Finally, the doors parted and a doctor approached us. Mrs. Carpenter, he inquired. Yes, that's me, Mom confirmed. How's Daisy? Miss Williams is stable and improving. I anticipate she'll pull through the gunshot wound. Fortunately, the bullet passed through without hitting any critical organs. She's fortunate, the doctor informed us. Just a tad to the left, and it could have been fatal. Thank the Lord, Mom breathed a sigh of relief. She's lost considerable blood, and her compromised state due to cancer and chemotherapy isn't in her favor. However, we've detected something else and informed her oncologist, the doctor disclosed. Oh? What's that? Mom inquired. I'm aware she's undergoing chemotherapy, but we've detected what seems to be signs of infection in her system. I've ordered a battery of tests as a precaution, he explained. Oh dear, Mom sighed. Will she be all right? It's too early to say. She's currently sedated. We'll need to keep her here for a minimum of 3 days. May we visit her? Mom requested. I'm afraid not. Perhaps tomorrow morning at the earliest. Let me provide you with a card. You can reach this number anytime for updates and to learn her room assignment, he said, handing Mom the card. We drove back to Mom's house in silence, with her crying most of the way. My thoughts were consumed by the surreal situation. Daisy, whom I once harbored dark fantasies about, was now fighting for her life in the hospital. Despite feeling a pang of remorse, I pushed the thoughts aside. Arriving home, I noticed the crime scene tape discarded in the trash, and a note from the detective declaring the scene cleared. Mom wasted no time in cleaning up, while I disposed of the chair Daisy had been shot in. Upon my return, I found Mom on her knees, tears mixing with the blood as she scrubbed the floor. Offering help, she declined, determined to manage alone. I suggested she stay at my place, but she insisted on staying. Respecting her decision, I resolved to stay with her despite her protestations. I offered to cook dinner before we turned in. Sharing a knowing look, we agreed a glass of wine would be a fitting end to a tumultuous day. As she resumed cleaning, her movements became more frantic. Concerned about potential nightmares, we found solace in a glass of wine or sheer exhaustion, sleeping deeply until Morning. We moved through the house quietly until the phone interrupted our somber atmosphere around 10. I retreated to the kitchen to give her privacy, and when she joined me minutes later, she relayed Daisy's condition, serious but stable, undergoing tests with an expected return to her room by mid-afternoon. Lost in thought, I barely registered any emotions. She interrupted my introspection, requesting a ride to the hospital at 2:30. I agreed, departing early to handle errands before meeting her at her house and proceeding to the hospital. After purchasing gifts for Daisy, including her favorite flowers and a book, Mom teased me playfully at the register, prompting me to defensively brush off any deeper sentiment. But her words lingered, reminding me that feelings, even complex ones, were valid. Afterward, we headed to Daisy's room. Though awake, she appeared drained. Mom planted a kiss on her cheek and passed her the purchased card. Her eyes sparkled when she noticed the flowers. "My favorites! You remembered!" she exclaimed, surprised. Her voice, though weak, held a pleasant tone. "Yes," I responded, extending the novel. "If I recall correctly, you were reading it when you left with Bruce," I added, my voice devoid of emotion, though a slight pang hit my gut. "Yes, I did read it, but never got to finish." "Thank you," she murmured softly, not meeting my gaze as she thumbed through the paperback. "Any updates?" Mom inquired. "Not yet," Daisy answered, shaking her head. She closed the book but held on to it tightly as if it were a cherished possession, nestling into it like a teddy bear. She added, "They said I probably won't hear anything for at least a day." "That's okay," Mom agreed. Then the nurse chimed in. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," Daisy groaned. "I'm exhausted, my side and stomach ache." "They'll figure it out," Mom comforted. "And Bruce?" Daisy inquired, still avoiding my gaze. "He was pronounced dead at the scene," Mom informed her. "Good," Daisy stated firmly, finally showing some strength. "I'm glad he's dead." Mom's expression darkened, but she remained silent, gently patting Daisy's hand and nodding in understanding. I stayed quiet while the women conversed. Hearing my ex-wife denounce Bruce eased some of the pent-up animosity, yet it couldn't erase a decade of bitterness. A nurse entered, checking Daisy's vital signs and administering medication. "Time for your meds, Daisy," the nurse said, handing her a cup of pills. Daisy swallowed them with water, expressing exhaustion. "Call me Daisy," she requested, showing resilience despite her weariness. "I'll inform the staff," the nurse said, suggesting rest for Daisy. Mom inquired about test results, and the nurse assured they'd have news by tomorrow morning. After exchanging farewells, I noticed Daisy's longing glance as we left. I offered a faint smile before closing the door. After dropping off my mom, I returned home to tackle my weekend tasks. The following morning, we convened in Daisy's hospital room. Mom, a part-time volunteer, had arrived a couple of hours earlier. Soon after my arrival, 2 doctors entered. I was introduced to Dr. Samuels, Daisy's surgeon, and Dr. Kincaid, her oncologist. Though they tried to appear assured, their concern was palpable. "What's the update?" I inquired, eager for positive news despite their demeanor. Dr. Kincaid responded first. "Miss Williams is grappling with both peritonitis and diverticulitis, which can account for some of the symptoms you've mentioned previously." Dr. Samuels elaborated. "Mrs. Carpenter," he addressed my mom, taking over the report, "our scans have detected several large pockets of infection in Daisy's abdomen. Furthermore, we suspect her gallbladder is perforated and will need to be removed." "How did this occur?" I inquired, feeling my mom's hand tighten around mine. "There are likely multiple factors, but it appears she had an underlying condition exacerbated by cancer and chemotherapy medications," Dr. Kincaid responded. "What's the next step?" my mom asked softly. "She will eventually require surgery to eradicate the infection and repair the damage, but we'd like to allow her body more time to recover from the recent surgery she underwent. So, we'll keep her here on antibiotics for the next couple of weeks to monitor if the infection subsides naturally. Chemotherapy will be paused during this period," Dr. Samuels explained. "What are her odds?" I asked, striving to maintain composure. The doctors exchanged glances before replying. I didn't like the gravity in their expressions. "I won't sugarcoat it," Dr. Samuels began. "Without surgery, her prospects are grim. Her body is currently delicately balanced. Administering high doses of antibiotics could potentially disrupt her metabolism and further weaken her, potentially even leading to a fatal outcome. Although the current antibiotic regimen seems to have halted the infection spread and is gradually reducing it, it won't mend the damage. While there's no visible perforation in the bowel wall, she was likely on the brink of it when we intervened. Exploratory surgery aimed at identifying unseen issues carries significant risks at this point. Manipulating the intestines could inadvertently worsen the situation. Our goal is to cleanse the intestines of infection and mend any damage. She must be robust enough to endure surgery and chemotherapy afterward. Malnutrition has severely debilitated her, and she won't withstand chemotherapy until the infections are eradicated and her other bodily functions normalize. Peritonitis alone poses a grave threat, and coupled with cancer, he trailed off with a shrug. The surgery itself poses significant risks, Dr. Kincaid interjected. Very significant, considering the extent of infection in her abdomen and the damage to her internal organs. Her chances of survival are estimated to be between 30 and 40%. So without surgery, my chances are slim to none, queried Daisy solemnly. Though her eyes were wide and she appeared to be sweating, her voice remained steady. Unfortunately, that appears to be the case, confirmed Dr. Kincaid. However, once you recover from the surgery, you should be able to proceed with chemotherapy without complications. In that case, it seems we have no alternative but to proceed with the surgery, Daisy conceded weakly, sinking back onto the bed. Very well. We'll organize everything accordingly, declared Dr. Samuels. With their departure, Daisy broke into tears. Her mother embraced her, offering solace. Don't fret, Daisy. You have the finest medical team in the hospital on your side. Everything will work out, she reassured Daisy amid her sobs. I had much to contend with, and this wasn't the place for it. It was odd. Not long ago, I might have welcomed news of Daisy's demise, but now my emotions were in turmoil. I have to head out. School starts tomorrow, but I'll check in on you from time to time, I offered. Yeah, I'd appreciate that, Mike, Daisy exclaimed. Mom smiled at me. We left the room and I walked her to her car, waving as she drove away. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept my promise, visiting Daisy several times. We discussed various topics, from my teaching and students to her failed marriage with Bruce and our own failed marriage. We also delved into our emotions and the events that led us here. During one visit, I brought up her family. I'm curious, I began. What? Daisy asked. What's the deal with your family? Why do they dislike you so much? Mom reached out to them, but they want nothing to do with you. Remember when I mentioned they disowned me after the lawsuit? Daisy recalled. Yes, I remember, I replied. What I didn't tell you is they knew about Bruce from the start. They agreed to keep you in the dark, and in return, Bruce promised to support them in retirement. He even offered to buy them cruise tickets. And you and your sister knew about this? I asked, feeling anger rising. Daisy looked down in shame. Yes, she whispered before meeting my gaze again. It was another betrayal. I know, and I'm deeply sorry. So your family used you and Bruce, just like you used me, I observed, my tone icy. She looked miserable. I tempered my emotions. If you don't want the answer, don't ask the question. Mostly, Daisy admitted sorrowfully. Things went downhill after the lawsuit, and my family wanted nothing to do with me. That explains their treatment of me after you left, I remarked. It also sheds light on why you thought it was acceptable to use me while waiting for Bruce. Everyone seemed to have the upper hand except me. Reinforcing my belief that reconciliation with Daisy was unlikely, given all that had transpired, Daisy seemed to share this sentiment, showing no initiative to revive what we once had. However, as we reconciled, I glimpsed the woman I fell in love with, sparking hope. Surprisingly, my animosity towards her and Bruce lessened after his demise, although I still wished for his just punishment beyond this life. Mr. Smith granted me the day off for Daisy's surgery, arranging for a substitute teacher. At the hospital, I expressed my worries before she was wheeled into the operating room. I've said hurtful things and I'm sorry, I began. I hope you can overcome this. Daisy's weak smile surprised me. Thank you, Mike. I accept your apology. I'm sorry for what I've done to you, she confessed. I love you, and you've endured more than you should have. Promise me something, she implored. What? I inquired. Find someone you love no matter what, she sincerely urged. I agreed, feeling a sense of absolution. We need to proceed to the operating room, sir, the orderly interrupted. For one moment, I requested. Spontaneously, I kissed Daisy's cheek. You've got this, I reassured her. For a brief moment, she resembled the woman I married, prompting me to wonder if she ever truly loved me beyond my role as a provider. I rose, feeling a bit lightheaded as the orderly guided her gurney out of the room. That was kind of you, Mike, Mom murmured softly as we followed into the operating room. After she was wheeled inside, we settled in the waiting area. Hours passed while the surgery progressed. Attempting to focus on the TV proved futile. My thoughts remained fixated on the tumultuous events of the past decade. Mom crocheted quietly while I paced, drowning myself in one cup of machine-made coffee after another, trapped in a relentless cycle of memories. 6 hours later, Dr. Samuels emerged from the operating room with a troubling expression. He motioned for us to join him in a nearby room, where he sat across from us, visibly weary. I braced for bad news, fearing he might break down in tears. Mom's grip on my hand was so tight it made my fingers ache, and I anticipated his words before he uttered them. "I'm deeply sorry, Mrs. Carpenter, Mr. Carpenter. We did everything within our power for Daisy. However, the level of infection and damage to her internal organs was too severe," he conveyed with sorrow. Her body ceased functioning. She had signed a DNR and a form consenting to donate her body to cancer research. Despite our ethical efforts, once her heart stopped, we were unable to revive her. "Please accept my condolences for your loss." Instantly, tears streamed down Mom's face, and though I felt a tear welling up in my eye, I refused to let it fall. I embraced my mother as she wept, nodding in acknowledgement to the doctor. "Thank you for all your efforts," I expressed to him. We exchanged a handshake, and I noticed a tear escaping from his eye. Once Mom had composed herself, we walked back to Daisy's room in a daze. We packed her belongings in silence, knowing words were unnecessary. In the bedside table drawer, I discovered a small envelope labeled Mike in Daisy's handwriting. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "Mike," the letter commenced, "you will only read this if I do not survive. Thank you for being there for me, especially in these last weeks. You owe me nothing, but you and your mother stood by me when others deserted me. I realize what I did to you a decade ago was inexcusable, and I deeply regret causing you pain. Despite everything, a part of me still loves you, and I'm sorry for the turmoil my involvement with Bruce has caused me. I understand that you will never feel the same toward me, and I respect that. My hope is that my passing will bring you peace at last. With love, Daisy." The note left me trembling, tears streaming down my face as I showed it to my mom. It unleashed a torrent of emotions. We shared, crying and holding each other, the first time I'd wept since my father's passing 6 years ago. Packing Daisy's belongings, I realized a profound change within me. A decade of anger and bitterness evaporated, replaced by an unexpected calmness. Her passing seemed to break down walls of resentment, offering me a way out of the dark maze I'd been trapped in. Strangely, her passing brought healing. After leaving the hospital in a daze, we settled Daisy's things at my mom's house, sharing a sober dinner. Later, she handed me a photo of Daisy smiling in her mother's chair during chemotherapy, a memento to cherish. Asking about contacting Daisy's family, my mom offered to call, but I declined, recalling a previous difficult conversation. Instead, I promised to make the call once home, taking the number she provided. Calling Daisy's father, Fred, I was met with hostility, leaving me puzzled by his animosity, considering their refusal of support and retirement crews. "I regret to inform you that your daughter Daisy passed away during surgery today," I conveyed. "I don't have a daughter named Daisy," Fred grumbled. "Not anymore," I clarified. "Why are you calling?" Fred inquired. "I just thought you might want to know," I responded. "What do you want from me?" Fred questioned. "Are you expecting us to request her body or something?" I countered, "No, she donated her body to cancer research," I disclosed, barely containing my frustration. "Well, at least her life served a purpose," he growled. "Don't call here again." I heard him curse before terminating the call. Although I felt the urge to call back and vent my anger, I realized it would be futile. With a sigh, I dialed my principal's number and informed him of the news. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mike," he sympathized. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, "but I'll be okay." "Say, why don't you take the remainder of the week off, and I'll mark it as paid parental leave. I'll arrange for a substitute." "Thank you. I really appreciate it," I expressed. After concluding our conversation, I retrieved a beer from the fridge. As I opened the bottle, I gazed at the photo my mom had given me. "Here's to you, kid," I murmured, taking a deep sip. In June, I drove to the cemetery, always feeling uneasy among reminders of mortality. Parking under a large maple tree, I made my way to the monument. Despite its newness, it bore the name Williams, a decision I reluctantly accepted due to bureaucratic insistence. I placed a white carnation in the bronze flower tube beside the monument, reflecting on the decision to bury Daisy's ashes rather than scatter them. Bruce, on the other hand, lay in a neglected corner, marked only by a simple concrete block with a serial number. Afterward, I poured a bottle of urine on his grave, a solitary act of closure. If anyone caught me urinating on his grave, I'd have some explaining to do. After a few minutes of reflection, I bid him farewell. All my tears were shed last week at her burial. Despite reaching out to Daisy's family and friends, I figured if Joe DiMaggio could honor Marilyn for 2 decades, I could lay Daisy to rest and leave her carnations. Sometimes, amidst the grayness, I felt neither sad nor happy, but like an empty blackboard waiting to be filled. Heading back to my car, I noticed 2 other mourners nearby. A woman in a neat black dress, her long blonde hair braided, and a young boy in a camouflage jacket. Approaching them, I glanced at the sign, Ryan G. Angers, Sergeant, USMC. The woman looked at me with fear in her blue eyes. "I'm sorry," I murmured, not wanting to intrude. Before she could respond, the boy said, "I miss him so much," his eyes reflecting the same shade of blue as his mother's, his words laden with longing, perhaps seeking solace or reaching out for help. He must have been a handsome man if he resembled his father. I knelt down, pulling out a notepad and pen from my pocket, tools I used more than my phone's note function. "Here, son," I said, offering them to him. "Write him a note and tuck it in that crack next to the marker. He'll get it." He hugged me, took the notebook and pen, and began writing. As he did, his mother gazed at me with genuine gratitude. Suddenly, I heard two soft chuckles, one in each ear, a female and a male. Then the female voice whispered, "Keep your promise." In that moment, I sensed June would no longer be a struggle for me.
When I first met Anne, we were young, ambitious, and full of hope. Our relationship grew quickly, built on shared dreams and late-night talks that lasted until sunrise. We married in our early 20s, moving into a cramped apartment with leaky faucets and noisy neighbors. It didn't matter. We were madly in love. Over time, our bond deepened, and we supported each other through thick and thin. Anne had always been the driven one, and her ambition was something I admired. It wasn't until years later that I'd realize how that drive could overshadow everything else. As we moved into our first home, life became more comfortable. I worked in IT, a job I found fulfilling, if not thrilling. Anne's career in real estate took off, and her charm and determination won over clients left and right. We started using little notes on a chalkboard in our kitchen, playful messages, reminders of dinner plans, or silly inside jokes. These small gestures of love became a cherished tradition. But as Anne's career evolved and eventually her foray into politics began, things started to change. Slowly, those notes of affection turned into curt updates. Out late, busy tomorrow, or nothing at all. The slap came out of nowhere, sending me reeling. My head buzzed as I staggered backward, hand instinctively touching my cheek. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the otherwise silent kitchen. "Hold on, let me backtrack a few weeks to make sense of this." It was just after 4 p.m., the time I usually get home from work, when I came in through the garage and walked into the kitchen. My job has a lot of UK clients, so I start my day at 7 a.m. to align with their schedules. It took some adjusting, but I've grown to like it. As usual, I glanced at the bulletin board. There was only one note. Working late. Great, another dinner alone. When Anne and I first got married and lived in a tiny apartment, we used a chalkboard in the kitchen to keep track of our schedules. When we moved into a house, the tradition continued. Back then, we left silly, affectionate messages. I once wrote, "I can't wait to get home, Cookie. I miss you already." She replied, "I miss you more, and stop calling me Cookie." The nickname came from when we first met at a bakery, but as her career took off, she didn't want others knowing I called her that. Still, I struggled to stop. Sure, it might sound corny, but those notes mattered to me. Now they've been replaced by clipped updates, like today's "working late." I'm not blind. I know relationships can lose their spark over time. But this felt like more than just routine. It wasn't just the absence of love notes. We barely spent time together anymore. My early work hours didn't help, but her job as a realtor made things even harder. She's constantly on call, handling paperwork at 9 p.m. or hosting open houses all weekend. Her schedule seems to belong to everyone but us. 2 years ago, Anne decided to run for city council. I tried to dissuade her, but her friends and colleagues kept encouraging her. At first, I wasn't too worried since the incumbent had won 2/3 of the vote in the previous election. Then, halfway through the campaign, his wife suffered a stroke, and he withdrew to care for her. Before I knew it, Anne had taken his seat. Her new role came with more than just monthly meetings. She started meeting constituents, joining task forces, and tackling the endless duties of an elected official. On election night, when she won re-election, I stood proudly by her side. She seemed so happy, and I was happy for her. But as the weeks passed, our time together became scarce. When I brought it up, she grew defensive, accusing me of jealousy and being unsupportive. That wasn't the worst of it. Over the past year, her attitude toward me had shifted. She seemed colder, sometimes even condescending. It wasn't obvious or overt. It was just a feeling that gnawed at me. I thought about it often during my downtime, and it left me in a bad place. I missed the time we used to spend together and resented how her responsibilities had taken over. I still remembered one night when we'd just gotten to bed, only for her real estate client to call with an emergency. That moment still stung. But to be fair, I'd also canceled plans before due to my own work emergencies. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, I wondered if I was being unfair. Maybe I was just jealous of how much others needed her time. But my instincts told me there was more to it than conflicting schedules. When she first joined the council, she shared everything about her meetings and the mayor's office. Now she barely mentioned any of it. Was it because the novelty had worn off? Or worse, had she decided I wasn't worth talking to anymore? A dark thought crept in. Could she be having an affair? I immediately dismissed it. My cookie would never cheat. But the idea lingered, fitting too well with the questions I'd been avoiding. Was she really working late every night? Or could she be meeting someone else? Why didn't she tell me where she was going anymore? Was it indifference or secrecy? And why was she so condescending? Did she see me as pathetic? A husband unknowingly betrayed? These doubts wouldn't leave me alone. As I sat there, anger and suspicion grew. I needed to stop myself before doing something reckless. So, I threw on my old work clothes, grabbed the lawnmower, and worked on the yard until it was too dark to continue. The physical activity helped clear my head, and by the time I sat down for a dinner of leftovers, I had calmed down enough to form a plan. In my job, when network issues arise, I run diagnostics to identify the cause. I decided to apply the same approach to my marriage. But what tools could I use? I considered surveillance, microphones, cameras, or tracking devices, but quickly realized how impractical it would be. Anne was hardly home, and between her real estate events and council responsibilities, she was constantly on the move. Spying seemed both risky and unlikely to yield results. Reluctantly, I realized hiring a professional investigator was the best option, even if it might be expensive. I searched online for detective agencies, but the sheer number of options was overwhelming. Ratings and reviews didn't inspire much confidence. They could easily be fake. Frustrated, I wondered if Craigslist or Angie's List had a section for private investigators. Then I stumbled on a Channel 9 news story about local detective agencies. It reminded me that Amy Howard, the news director at Channel 9, was an old friend. We'd even dated briefly in college. Hoping she might help, I gave her a call. "Hey, Amy, long time no see. Any chance you're free for a beer tonight?" She sounded pleasantly surprised. "Dave, I think I can swing that. It's a slow news day, so unless something comes up, I'll be there." When she arrived, I couldn't help but notice how well she'd aged. She still had the charm that had first drawn me to her, now enhanced by the confidence of a successful professional. It suited her perfectly. Amy and I caught up on life and mutual friends, but after a while, I steered the conversation in a new direction. "Didn't you do a story on local detective agencies recently?" I asked. Amy gave me a knowing look and said, "Oh, Dave, I was wondering why you hadn't brought up Anne yet. Are you looking for recommendations?" I sighed and nodded. She paused thoughtfully before continuing. "With Anne's situation, you should avoid the larger agencies. More employees mean a higher risk of gossip. Does that make sense?" "Completely," I replied. She went on. "Also, steer clear of one-person operations. They're usually too stretched to handle things quickly. If you want something dependable, I'd recommend the Masterson Agency. They're not cheap, but they're professional, thorough, and they get results." She added, "The private detective world can be messy, but Masterson is a solid option." I thanked her and left feeling slightly more confident. The next morning, her advice still resonated, so I called Masterson. The receptionist told me I could meet Mr. Masterson himself if I came in first thing. "I'll be there," I promised, trying to steady my voice. That evening, Anne came home on time, and we had dinner together for the first time in days. Nervous about keeping up conversation, I didn't need to worry. She spent the evening ranting about a businessman planning to run against her. Her frustration filled the silence. The next morning, I left early, skipping breakfast, but leaving a note for Anne on the bulletin board. Traffic was light, and I arrived downtown earlier than expected. With time to spare, I stopped at Stranger Brew, my favorite coffee shop, for a coffee and breakfast sandwich to calm my nerves. As the cafe filled, a commotion drew my attention. A red-faced man was shouting at a young Latina woman sitting alone. "You're not done yet! What gives you the right to hog a table when others are waiting?" he bellowed, loud enough to turn heads. The woman sat frozen, stunned by his outburst. "You're a Mexican, aren't you?" he sneered. "Probably a wetback. You come here, take our jobs, and now our tables. Why don't you swim back across the Rio Grande?" He then knocked over her coffee, spilling it across the table. Before I knew it, I was standing between the man and the woman. "Leave her alone," I said firmly. "She was here first, and she has every right to sit here. You owe her a new coffee and an apology for your insults." The man's face darkened with anger, and he stepped closer. I braced for a confrontation, but before anything happened, the cafe owner appeared, holding a sawed-off pool cue. "You!" the owner barked, pointing at the man. "Get out of my shop and don't come back. You're not welcome here." The man muttered something about how the place sucked anyway before storming out. Once the tension settled, I turned to the woman. "I'm so sorry about that. Can I get you another coffee?" Maria Elena looked at me, her surprise evident. "You don't even know me. Why did you step in?" she asked. I shrugged casually. "I can't stand bullies or bigots," I replied. Her expression softened into a faint smile as she extended her hand. "I'm Maria Elena Alvarez. Thank you for standing up for me. It really means a lot." Taking her hand, I said, "You're welcome. I'm David Davis, and I'm glad I could help." The cafe owner returned then with 2 fresh coffees. "These are on the house. I'm sorry for what happened and hope you both feel welcome here in the future." Maria Elena and I thanked him, and she turned to me. "Would you like to have coffee with me? It'll free up your table." "I'd love to," I replied, sitting across from her. As we talked, she shared that she'd started a new job nearby and arrived early to avoid being late. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "Not as often as I'd like," I admitted. "I'm here today before a personal business meeting." She glanced at her watch. "I should get going," she said, standing and offering her hand. "Thank you again, David. It was a pleasure meeting you." "Likewise," I said, shaking her hand and watching her leave. After finishing my coffee, I left for my meeting at the Masterson Agency. To my surprise, I spotted Maria walking in the same direction. When she stopped at a crosswalk, I caught up to her. She gave me a polite smile and nod, but as we continued walking, she glanced back again, her expression wary. "Great," I muttered to myself. "Now she thinks I'm following her." To my dismay, Maria entered the same building as the agency. I slowed down, hoping she'd be gone before I arrived, but when I walked in, she was in the lobby, arms crossed, staring at me suspiciously. "Look," she said as I approached, "I appreciate what you did at the cafe, but that doesn't give you the right to—" No, I interrupted. "I swear I'm not following you. I have an appointment in this building." Her eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet and walked toward the elevator. I followed. When she pressed the button for the 4th floor, she glanced at me. "I'm headed to the 4th floor too," I admitted awkwardly. She frowned, but said nothing. When we exited, she strode down the hall and stopped at a door marked Employee Entrance. Before entering, her expression softened. "Good luck with your business, David," she said. "I get it now." "Thanks, Maria. And good luck with your new job," I replied. As I entered the agency, a new worry hit me. She must know why I'm here. Now, 2 people knew I needed a detective. The receptionist directed me to wait, and soon I was ushered into Bradley Masterson's office. If anyone fit the name Masterson, it was him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded authority. Though I felt intimidated when we shook hands, his professionalism quickly put me at ease. He guided me through questions about my wife, her habits, my suspicions, and details I hadn't considered. It was clear he knew his work. After half an hour, he leaned back in his chair. "Your wife's public role makes surveillance easier. She's accustomed to being observed, so it won't raise suspicion." A warning bell went off in my mind. "Your team has to be discreet. If this leaks, it could cause a political scandal." He gave a confident smile. "Mr. Davis, discretion is our hallmark. Neither your wife nor anyone around her will know." Still uneasy, I asked, "What methods will you use? Audio, video, GPS?" Masterson leaned forward, arms crossed, and fixed me with a sharp stare. "I won't disclose that. I don't want you looking for devices or inadvertently alerting her. I also don't want you conducting your own surveillance. Stick to your normal routine. We're professionals. Amateurs getting involved only mess things up. Do I make myself clear?" His bluntness stunned me. "Crystal clear," I replied. Then something else struck me. "You said 2 weeks. You really think you can get answers that fast?" Masterson leaned back and smiled. "You've noticed a big change in your wife's behavior over the past 6 months. If she's having an affair, this is likely its most intense phase. She'll want to see her partner frequently and feels confident she's not being caught. I expect we'll have a clear answer by next Friday. At the very least, we'll identify any suspicious behavior that might require further investigation. I was impressed. He seemed skilled and had a solid grasp of human nature. I felt I'd chosen the right person for the job. Okay, I'm convinced. What will this cost me? He named a figure that made me flinch. It's a significant amount, he admitted, but consider the resources involved: staff, vehicles, and expensive equipment. More importantly, we'll give you clarity. How much is your peace of mind worth? He was right. I wrote the check. Over the next 2 weeks, I felt uneasy, second-guessing myself. Am I acting normal? Do I seem suspicious? Am I asking too much or too little? Anne's behavior made it clear it didn't matter. She treated me with the same coldness as always. When I asked about her work, she responded curtly, as if humoring me. It was obvious she thought I wouldn't understand her counsel responsibilities. I felt less like her husband and more like an annoyance. That weekend, I suggested we go out together. She brushed me off. I've got open houses all weekend, and you know how exhausting those are. It felt like we were roommates, not a married couple. Memories of our life together haunted me. The shared dreams, the long talks, the passion we once had. We couldn't walk past each other without ending up in each other's arms, overwhelmed by desire. What happened to that love and passion? The irony was cruel. The closer we got to achieving our dreams, the more distant we became. I realized how much my career drove me, not just for financial security, but because I found it intellectually fulfilling. And yet, I wondered, had I pushed Anne away? If I had, I felt she was equally to blame. Anne was a great realtor, but she always wanted more. Winning a council seat had been her dream, and now she was hinting at running for mayor. I couldn't understand why she was never satisfied with what she already had. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that our careers had driven a wedge in our marriage. Yet, a nagging voice warned me there might be something deeper I was missing. Was I being paranoid? Or was there a real problem? Despite my discomfort, I decided hiring Masterson was the right move. Peace of mind was worth it. The 2 weeks felt like waiting for surgery, terrified of the outcome but desperate for answers. On the morning of my meeting, I stopped at Stranger Brew for coffee, my last meal. As I sat there, I scanned the room, half hoping to see Maria Elena, but relieved she wasn't there. When the time came, I walked to Masterson's office, feeling like a man heading to the gallows. As I checked in, Masterson appeared and motioned for me to follow. His subdued tone as he greeted me made my stomach churn. "Mr. Davis, come on in," he said. Uh-oh. Not good. He sat behind his desk, resting his hands on a folder. The air was thick with tension. Unable to take it, I blurted out, "What did you find?" He slid the folder across the desk. "See for yourself," he said quietly. My heart raced as I opened the folder. The first photo showed Anne outside a house, holding the door for a young couple. A for sale sign was barely visible in the corner. Confused, I flipped to the next. A shot of her in a council meeting, then another of her talking to the mayor in City Hall. The following photos showed her entering her real estate office. I thumbed through them all. They were completely ordinary. Nothing suspicious. Looking up at Masterson, I saw his grim face transform into a broad grin. The investigator looked at me with a steady gaze. "Mr. Davis," he began, "your wife is not cheating. She hasn't done anything even remotely suspicious. She's exactly what she seems, a hard-working councilwoman and realtor." He leaned back in his chair, his expression confident. "Your wife is driven, successful, and dedicated, but not unfaithful." His tone softened as he added, "I know these past 2 weeks have been difficult for you, but now you can let go of your doubts and focus on enjoying your marriage." A warm smile spread across his face. "Most of the time, I'm delivering bad news to spouses. It's refreshing to be able to share something positive for once." Relief washed over me, but as I opened my mouth to thank him, he raised a hand to stop me. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis," he said firmly. "Your wife is everything she appears to be." Then, with a touch of humor, he handed me an envelope. "Here's the remainder of your bill. If you pay the receptionist on your way out, we won't need to mail it. I assume you wouldn't want that." He chuckled. Relieved, I nodded and left the office, lighter than I'd felt in months. I shook Masterson's hand, thanking him before leaving. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in ages. Relief quickly gave way to determination. I need to fix this. I need to show Anne how much I love her and stop taking her for granted. By the time I got home, I had a plan for the weekend, which fortunately was free of obligations for Anne. Friday night, flowers, takeout from her favorite Mediterranean spot, a bubble bath, and fresh sheets. Saturday, breakfast in bed, a spa day, more flowers, dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, and a night of rekindled romance. Anne got home around 7 o'clock, exhausted. She flopped onto the couch with a sigh. "I'm too tired to cook," she said, then perked up, sniffing the air. "What's that smell, and where did these flowers come from?" I knelt beside her, grinning. "The flowers are for my beautiful wife, and dinner's ready." She looked at me, surprised but pleased. "They're lovely. Let's put them on the table." I plated her meal, poured her favorite wine, and served it with exaggerated flair. "Your wine, my lady," I said. She smiled, tired but genuine. "I'll take it." As we ate, she paused and asked, "This is wonderful, but why now? Do you feel guilty about something?" I expected that. "Yes," I said honestly. "I've been so caught up in my work that I haven't appreciated how hard you're working. You do so much, and I've neglected you. I want to make it right." She studied me for a moment, then smiled warmly. "We've both been neglecting each other, haven't we?" After dinner, I drew her a bubble bath. "Relax as long as you want," I said, "and get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be even better." She laughed, a genuine, joyful sound I hadn't heard in a long time. Later, she noticed the new bedding. "Is this new?" "Only the finest for you," I replied. She smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Dave." The next morning, I woke early to prepare breakfast. Eggs Benedict, hash browns, fruit, and mimosas. I placed the tray on her nightstand. "Don't take too long," I teased. "Your spa appointment is at 10. Her eyes widened. "You're spoiling me." "Good," I said with a grin. "You deserve it." After Anne left for the spa, I tidied the house and booked a table at Il Fiorentino, her favorite upscale restaurant. When she returned in the afternoon, glowing and relaxed, I handed her a credit card. "Pick out something elegant for tonight," I said. "It's going to be magical." That evening, she descended the stairs in a stunning new dress, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. Over Prosecco at dinner, she smirked. "Are you sure you're not guilty of something, Dave? No mistress hiding somewhere?" I laughed, though her words stung given my recent paranoia. "Absolutely not. I take my vows seriously, and I could never find anyone more perfect than you." Her smile softened as she raised her glass. "I'd never do that to you either." We skipped dessert, eager to end the night on a high note, and returned home hand in hand. "What's next, dear husband?" she teased, her voice playful. That night we rekindled the passion we thought was gone, rediscovering the love that had brought us together. The next morning we slept in and went for a leisurely brunch, savoring every moment. The weekend felt like a revival of our old life, full of love and connection. By Monday morning, I was in great spirits. My effort to reconnect with Anne was working, and I felt closer to her than I had in months. Before leaving for work, I left a note on the bulletin board. "Cookies are sweet, cookies are fine, cookies, I'm glad you're mine. Corny, but heartfelt." I couldn't wait for her to see it. Work flew by, and I made sure to leave early so I could greet her. As I heard the garage door, I waited eagerly in the kitchen, ready to welcome her. But when she entered, everything unraveled. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. Stunned, I staggered back. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, my face stinging. "You fool!" she screamed, her face twisted with rage. "You've been spying on me? You hired detectives to follow me? You don't trust me?" Her words struck harder than the slap. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She stood, fists clenched, trembling with fury. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to know your own husband doesn't trust you? Well, say something," I stammered. "But I trust you, Cookie. I know you've been loyal." "Loyal? After you've had me followed for weeks?" Her voice cracked with anger. "And don't you ever call me Cookie again." I stared at the floor, unable to respond. My silence only fueled her anger. "So I was right this weekend. You were only nice because you felt guilty," she accused. "That's not true," I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "If you didn't feel guilty, you damn well should have." Tears streamed down her face. "I've never felt so betrayed, and by my own husband." She turned and stormed up the stairs. "I can't even look at you right now." Anne stomped upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. I sank onto the couch, head in my hands, overwhelmed. How do I fix this? Pacing the room, I thought, flowers and candy won't work, and if she finds out how much I paid Masterson, she'll lose it. Worse, what if she wanted a divorce? I couldn't blame her. Why had I let my paranoia ruin everything? After some time, I heard her come downstairs. She grabbed her purse, shot me a furious look, and hissed, "I can't stay in the same house with you," before storming out. I hurried after her. "Are you coming back?" "I haven't decided," she snapped, then drove off, tires screeching. Feeling helpless, I went upstairs to see what she'd been doing. The bedroom looked normal, but the guest room was a mess. My clothes piled on the bed and floor. She'd cleared my closet and dresser. At least she didn't kick me out of the house entirely, I thought as I moved my belongings into the guest room. Later, I forced myself to eat leftovers, waiting for her return. Hours passed, and I eventually gave up and went to bed. I woke briefly to her footsteps on the stairs and heard the bedroom door slam and lock behind her. The next morning, I used the guest bathroom to get ready for work. Before leaving, I wrote on the bulletin board, "I'm sorry, Anne. Can we talk?" It wasn't much, but it was a start. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus, consumed by thoughts of how to explain myself without making things worse. "I love you, but I suspected you were cheating," won't work. Or, "Now that I've checked you out, I trust you." Yeah, no. Finally, I decided on honesty. I was scared we were drifting apart and let paranoia take over. "I'm sorry." I left work early, ready to apologize, but my hopes crumbled when I saw the bulletin board. My note was erased, replaced with, "Go to hell." Not a good sign. Still, I made dinner, hoping we could talk. 2 hours later, I ate alone, put her plate in the fridge, and admitted defeat. When she finally came home, I couldn't help but say, "I was worried about you. I didn't know where you were." Her eyes were cold as steel. "Why didn't you ask your private investigator?" she shot back with biting sarcasm, then went upstairs, slamming the door. I groaned. We were in a cold war, with no truce in sight. Anne came and went as she pleased, ignoring me entirely. I was certain she would divorce me, but the papers never came. For now, we were just two strangers sharing a house. Over time, I noticed that while our relationship hadn't warmed, it had shifted. Her anger gradually gave way to indifference. She started speaking to me again, but only about practical matters. "Tomorrow is garbage day," or "Is there mail for me?" Still, she refused to discuss our issues, and the bedroom door remained shut. At night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts cycled endlessly like one of those irritating looping GIFs online. Resentment and defensiveness would kick in first. How long is she going to act like this? I haven't even done anything wrong. It's unfair for her to shut me out. Then guilt would take over. "This is your fault, David. Imagine how you'd feel if she did the same to you. How long would it take for you to forgive her?" Finally, I'd circle back to remorse. Above all, I felt deep pain. I missed my wife. I missed the emotional and physical connection we once had. My intention was to bring us closer, but all I'd done was push her away. I couldn't stop replaying the wonderful weekend we'd shared just before everything fell apart, mourning what I'd lost. Others began noticing my depression, but their questions and concern only made things worse. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining myself. I knew exactly how they'd react. They'd be horrified by what I'd done. Worse still, if word got out that I'd hired a detective to follow Anne, it could spark rumors and potentially damage her political career. If I destroyed her future, our relationship would be beyond saving. I felt trapped and miserable, with no one to confide in. Now I understood what purgatory felt like. One Sunday, I went for a walk in the woods, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. After an hour, I found a small clearing and sat on a log to rest. The tranquility of the setting sharply contrasted with the storm inside me. I can't keep living like this. I love Anne, but this isn't a marriage anymore. It's not fair to either of us. We're both at fault, but most of the blame is mine. In that quiet clearing, I reached a painful realization. Our marriage is dead, and I'm the one who eliminated it. Strangely, admitting this brought a small sense of relief. I took a deep breath and looked at the beautiful sky and trees around me. This place is so peaceful. I wish Anne could see it with me. But that thought brought a bitter taste of defeat. The next day, I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied. When that wasn't enough, I began researching family law firms that specialized in amicable divorces. If our marriage truly was beyond saving, I wanted the split to be as respectful as possible. After some searching, I found a firm that seemed to align with my goals and scheduled a consultation. I had just hung up from setting the appointment when my phone rang again. "Is this David Davis?" asked a hesitant voice, one I vaguely recognized. "Yes," I replied. "Who's calling?" "This is Maria Elena Alvarez. I'm not sure if you remember me, but we met at Stranger Brew." The name and the encounter came back to me immediately. "Yes, of course, Maria Elena. What can I do for you?" Her tone grew serious. "I need to talk to you about something important." "Okay," I responded cautiously. "What's this about?" "Not over the phone," she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "This needs to be discussed in person." Her insistence made me wary. "Can you at least give me an idea of what this is about?" I pressed. "Please, David," she said, almost pleading now. "I need to see you right away. I can come to your office if that works for you." Her tone intrigued me, though I was still wary. I decided a public place would be safer. "No, my office isn't a good idea. How about this? I'll meet you at Stranger Brew in 15 minutes. Does that work?" "Yes," she agreed quickly. "Thank you." What am I walking into? I wondered as I grabbed my coat and left for the cafe. Despite my unease, curiosity flickered in the back of my mind. When I arrived, Maria Elena was already seated at a table near the back. She stood up, smiling nervously as I approached. She handed me a cup of my usual coffee, clearly remembering my order. I accepted it and sat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her tone serious. I nodded, taking a sip. "So, what's this about?" She leaned forward, her face earnest. "First, let me ask, how are things with your wife?" The question threw me off. I hesitated. "Why do you want to know?" "I know about the investigation," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. I froze, stunned. "How do you know?" She winced. "I worked for Masterson," she admitted. "I was part of the team that followed your wife." A wave of emotions, embarrassment, anger, confusion, washed over me. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process her words. "Why are you telling me this now?" She bit her lip, hesitating before continuing. "Because there's something you don't know, something Masterson didn't tell you." My stomach sank. "What are you talking about?" Maria Elena leaned in closer, lowering her voice even more. "Yesterday morning I was making copies at the office. Your file was left on the copier. I know I shouldn't have touched it, but I remembered how kind you were to me, and curiosity got the better of me. So I looked inside." "What did you see?" I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. She took a deep breath. "I saw the photos Masterson gave you, the ones of your wife doing her usual activities, showing houses, attending council meetings, that sort of thing." I nodded impatiently. "Yes, and?" "And there were other photos," she said, locking eyes with me. "Photos that Masterson didn't give you." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of photos?" "Photos of your wife with another man," she said cautiously. "And they weren't just standing together. They were intimate." My stomach dropped, and I felt my breath catch. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Masterson told me she wasn't cheating. He said—" "He lied," Maria Elena interrupted. "I don't know why, but he lied to you. There's no mistaking what's in those pictures." My head swirled with disbelief. "Do you have copies of the pictures?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't get a chance. Masterson caught me before I could make copies. He flew into a rage and fired me on the spot. But I swear to you, David, I'm telling the truth." I studied her expression for any hint of dishonesty, but all I saw was earnestness. Still, I couldn't make sense of it. Why would Masterson lie to me? What was in it for him? Maria Elena seemed to read my thoughts. "I don't know why he lied, but I think I know what's going on. Your wife is a public figure. If those pictures got out, they'd destroy her career. I think Masterson is blackmailing her." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Blackmail? Was Anne keeping secrets to protect herself? "There's more," Maria Elena said urgently. "Before I left, I saw Masterson's calendar. He has a meeting with your wife today, in less than 30 minutes. That stopped me in my tracks. There were plenty of people who would exploit a scandal to unseat Anne in the next election. As ambitious as she was, Anne would do almost anything to avoid that kind of humiliation. Without thinking, I rubbed the spot on my jaw where she had slapped me. Was she lying to me all along? Was she treating me like dirt and laughing about it with her lover? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I stood abruptly and walked toward the sidewalk. Maria Elena hurried after me, grabbing my arm. "David, where are you going?" she asked urgently. "I'm heading to Masterson's office," I replied. "I need to get to the bottom of this." "Wait," she said, pulling me back. "Think for a second. If I'm right, Masterson will only lie to protect his leverage over your wife. He's probably already hidden those photos. You won't get anything from him." I paused, uncertain, and she seized the moment to continue. "And what if you confront Anne? Do you really think she'll admit to anything? If you tell them what I've told you, they'll just dismiss me as a disgruntled former employee. It'll be my word against theirs." She tugged me toward a nearby bench and looked at me intently. "David, I swear I'm telling the truth. Please believe me." I studied her face for a long moment, trusting my instincts. She wasn't lying. She was trying to do the right thing. "I believe you, Maria Elena," I said firmly. Relief flickered across her face, but her expression quickly grew serious again. "There's another reason I needed to meet you now," she said. "I found out where they're meeting. It's a suburban address. If you're willing to watch for a while, we might figure out what's really going on." "Do you have the address?" I asked. She handed me a slip of paper. 2232 Magnolia Lane. "Why there?" I muttered to myself. "It's a residential area." Shaking my head, I said, "We'll figure it out when we get there. Let's go. My car is nearby." We drove in silence, but my mind was racing. I'd spent so much time feeling guilty for not trusting Anne, only to find I might have been right all along. My anger boiled beneath the surface. Who was this other man? How long had the affair been going on? And how was Masterson involved? I forced myself to stay calm. "Don't jump to conclusions, David. Wait until you have proof." But that was easier said than done. "There it is," Maria Elena said, snapping me out of my thoughts as I nearly drove past the address. I turned around and parked 2 houses down. "This is a nice neighborhood," I said, more to myself than to her. "Whose house is this?" As we got out of the car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a for sale sign from Anne's real estate agency. It all clicked. "That's why they're meeting here," I said quietly but firmly. "The house is vacant. The owners moved out months ago, and she's been trying to sell it." We crouched behind the tall hedge encircling the property and headed toward the driveway. 2 cars were parked there, neither of which I recognized. "Stay here. I'll scout around and see if I can spot them," I whispered. "I'm coming too," Maria Elena said firmly, and I shrugged. Together, we cautiously moved toward the house, sticking to the shade of the hedge. From the back of the house, we heard faint noises. As we crept closer, we noticed French doors leading into what appeared to be a den. Peering inside, my adrenaline surged. Anne, wearing lingerie I'd never seen before, was lounging on the couch, speaking to someone out of view around the corner. I clenched my teeth. She seemed completely at ease. Suddenly, a figure stepped into view, Bradley Masterson, grinning smugly. As they laughed together, I grabbed Maria Elena's arm and motioned for her to follow me back outside. Rage boiled in my chest. "That witch," I hissed once we were safely out of earshot. "If this is blackmail, she sure doesn't look like she minds." "Should we take pictures?" Maria Elena asked. I considered for a moment before smirking. "Oh, we'll take plenty of pictures and maybe involve a few others." I hurried over to Anne's for sale sign, yanked it from the ground, and tossed it behind a hedge where it wouldn't be easily spotted. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency. "I'd like to report a break-in," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I saw 2 people force their way into 2232 Magnolia Lane. They're likely still inside. Please send someone quickly." I hung up without giving my name. Maria Elena looked at me in confusion, but I ignored her and made another call. "Hey, Amy, it's David. Are you still covering the local burglary series? I've got a hot lead for you. 2232 Magnolia Lane. Police are already on their way. If you act fast, you'll beat the competition and get some great footage." After thanking her, I ended the call. "What did you just do?" Maria Elena asked, her voice uneasy. I waved her question aside. "Come on, let's get those pictures." We crept back to the French doors. Inside, another man had joined them. Maria Elena gripped my arm. "That's the man from the photos," she whispered. "Do you know who he is?" "Oh, I know him," I said bitterly. "Anne introduced me to him at one of her events. That's Harold Hartfield, head of the Zoning Commission." Before I could say more, Maria Elena tugged me away. A patrol car had just pulled up at the end of the driveway. We hurried toward the officers. "We just saw them," I said, trying to sound breathless. "They're still inside. If you move quickly, you can catch them." The senior officer glanced at his partner. "There are cars in the driveway and no sign of forced entry," he said, his tone skeptical. "Are you sure a crime is happening?" Just then, a Channel 9 news van screeched to a stop nearby. A reporter and cameraman jumped out. "What's going on? Are we getting any action today?" the reporter asked eagerly. Before the officers could respond, a piercing scream tore through the air, freezing everyone in place. "Oh my God!" I shouted. "He's eliminating her!" The officers exchanged panicked glances as another scream rang out louder than the first. "Let's move!" the senior officer barked, drawing his weapon. The 2 officers rushed to the front door and disappeared inside. "Start filming," the reporter commanded the cameraman, who immediately trained his lens on the house. The reporter turned to the camera, speaking rapidly. "Behind me is a home at 2232 Magnolia Lane, where police are responding to a suspected burglary. Moments ago, we heard what sounded like a violent struggle." He stopped mid-sentence as chaos erupted inside. There was the sound of crashing furniture, breaking glass, and panicked shouting. The cameraman refocused just in time to capture Harold Hartfield stumbling out the front door, completely unclothed. A second later, Anne followed, equally unclothed. "Wait for me!" she yelled, as Hartfield threw open the door of one of the cars and jumped in. She climbed in after him, and he reversed sharply, nearly hitting the patrol car at the driveway's edge. Desperately, Hartfield shifted into drive and sped across the lawn. The car tore up the yard before crashing into the thick hedge, where the rear axle became stuck, leaving the tires spinning uselessly in midair. Recognizing the two public figures, the reporter signaled the cameraman and rushed toward the stranded car. "Commissioner Hartfield, Councilwoman Davis, can you explain to our viewers what you were doing here together? And where are your clothes?" The commissioner refused to respond to the reporter's questions, but when pressed, he reluctantly rolled down the car window. The camera continued filming as he and Harold argued furiously, both attempting to shield their unclothedness with their hands and arms. The cameraman then turned his focus back to the house, capturing Bradley Masterson being escorted out, hunched and unclothed, his hands cuffed and blood dripping from several cuts. The two officers leading him didn't look much better, their uniforms torn and faces weary. "Who's that?" the reporter asked, perplexed. "That's Bradley Masterson," Maria Elena explained. "He's the president of Masterson Investigations, a private investigator." The reporter jotted down the name but looked puzzled. "And who are you?" he asked. "Maria Elena," she replied. "I decided it was time to leave." "Let's go home," I said firmly, taking her hand and steering her to my car. As we drove away, we passed police officers attempting to disperse a growing crowd of curious neighbors. In the days that followed, the story became a citywide sensation. Channel 9 used the footage in their evening news promo, repeatedly showing the commissioner, councilwoman, and detective attempting to cover themselves. The clip was so scandalous that the station's national affiliate picked it up, airing it on national news. Soon, nearly everyone in the country had seen the unforgettable footage of my wife sprinting across the lawn in her birthday suit. Masterson was quickly jailed for aggravated attack on a police officer. His behavior during the arrest didn't help. He hurled crude insults and threats at the officers escorting him to his cell. The judge, unimpressed, denied him bail. His arrogance ensured he would remain behind bars until his trial. The cases against Anne and Harold were more complicated. It was quickly determined that no breaking and entering had occurred. Anne was the listing agent for the property and had legitimate access. Even trespassing charges were dismissed. Still, the scandal forced both of them into hiding, as public outrage was relentless. Local media wasted no time digging deeper. Headlines were merciless, with one particularly scathing piece titled, "Commissioner and Councilwoman, Politics Make Strange Acquaintances." At first, I thought the frenzy was purely due to their affair, but it turned out to be much more. A determined journalist uncovered evidence of bribery linked to several city real estate projects. Anne had been soliciting bribes from developers while Harold used his position to manipulate zoning permits, exchanging favors for Zex. The revelations unraveled their schemes, and law enforcement moved swiftly. Both Anne and Harold were arrested and charged with official misconduct. Their downfall became a spectacle, every detail gleefully documented by the media. Their once respected names became synonymous with corruption and disgrace. The day after the scandal broke, I returned to my office and called the divorce attorney I had initially contacted. "Oh," the receptionist said cheerfully. "Does this mean you and your wife are reconciling?" "No," I said coldly. "It means I don't want an amicable split anymore. I'll be hiring a shark to ensure she's left with nothing." The police questioned me several times during their investigation, probing whether I had been involved in or benefited from Anne's schemes. Thankfully, I had nothing to hide. Anne had kept her illicit earnings in an account solely under her name. When I explained how I had hired Masterson to investigate her, the officer interviewing me simply shook his head in disbelief. My friends and colleagues were sympathetic, but unsure of what to say. No one could openly express, "Sorry your wife turned out to be a corrupt cheater," or "Sorry you were played for a fool." Most chose to avoid me altogether. I didn't blame them. I wanted to avoid myself too. The divorce moved quickly, thanks to my ruthless attorney. Anne's public disgrace and pending charges left her with little leverage, and the settlement was heavily skewed in my favor. By the end, Anne was left with almost nothing, except for what little remained of her tarnished reputation. I thought I was finally done with that chapter of my life. Then, unexpectedly, Anne's lawyer contacted me. They wanted me to testify in her defense. The idea was so absurd that I laughed when I first heard it. My amusement faded when the lawyer explained that if I refused, I would be subpoenaed. I hated the thought of being dragged back into Anne's mess, but curiosity won out. The lawyer mentioned that Anne would be present during the pretrial meeting, and I couldn't resist the chance to confront her. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, Anne was already seated at the conference table, wearing one of her signature power suits. She looked composed, but the stress was visible in her eyes. She offered me a tight smile, her gaze steely and cold. "Mr. Davis," the lawyer began in a neutral tone, "I understand your marriage is ending, but we're not here to discuss that. We are seeking to establish that Mrs. Davis, prior to these events, was a loving wife and a person of good character. We would like you to testify to that effect." I turned my gaze calmly from the lawyer to Anne. "When I married my wife," I began, "she seemed like the most captivating, intelligent, and dynamic woman I had ever met. She was smart, funny, and charismatic. People were naturally drawn to her." The lawyer nodded, encouraging me to go on. "For the first 6 years of our marriage, Anne and I shared the same dreams and goals. I believed we were building a life together." I paused, fixing my eyes on Anne. "But then, she changed." The lawyer tensed. "Changed, Mr. Davis." "Yes," I said. "After she was elected to the city council, she became more ambitious, self-centered even. She neglected our marriage entirely to focus on her career. The contempt she showed me eventually drove me to hire a private investigator." "That's enough, Mr. Davis," the lawyer interjected, her alarm apparent. Anne waved her off dismissively. "It's fine. He was never going to help me, Virginia." She turned to me with a cold, calculating look. "So why are you here, Dave? What do you want?" I leaned forward. "I want 30 minutes alone with you. Just enough time to ask some questions." Anne raised an eyebrow, glancing at her lawyer, who looked visibly uneasy. "You don't have to agree to this," the lawyer said quickly, but Anne raised her hand to silence her. "Fine," she said coolly. "You've got 30 minutes." The lawyer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" she asked Anne. Anne gave a sharp nod. "It's okay. He won't hurt me." Her voice was calm, almost dismissive, but I could see the cracks beneath her composed facade. Reluctantly, the lawyer gathered her things, shot me one last warning look, and left, closing the door behind her. Anne leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Well, Dave, the floor is yours. What do you want to ask?" I stared at her, the weight of everything she had done pressing down on me. "Why, Anne, why did you do it?" My voice was even, but anger simmered underneath. She leaned forward suddenly, her eyes blazing with fury. "Why? This is all your fault, you know. I wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't hired that detective to spy on me." I blinked, taken aback by her audacity. "My fault? You're the one who—" "Yes, your fault!" she snapped, cutting me off. "Everything was fine until that fool showed up at my office with those pictures of Harold and me. You sent him after me." I clenched my fists, but kept my tone steady. "And you wouldn't have had anything to worry about if you hadn't been sleeping with Hartfield." Her expression shifted into a mocking smirk, as though I was missing the point entirely. "It wasn't an affair, Dave. It was politics." "Politics?" I repeated, incredulous. "You slept with him for politics?" Anne shrugged nonchalantly. "Harold was a terrible lover, smaller than you if you must know. But he had something I needed, influence over zoning permits." I frowned. "And why did you need zoning permits? You're not a real estate developer." She rolled her eyes, clearly exasperated. "I didn't need them, Dave. The developers did. And I needed their support for my mayoral campaign. That's how politics works." "So, it was just about endorsements?" I asked sharply. "Not the money?" Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Okay, maybe it was about the money too," she admitted with a sly smile. "But none of this would have been an issue if you hadn't been so damn nosy." Disbelief washed over me as I shook my head. "Anne, what about Masterson? What did he want?" "Half," she said flatly. "Half of what?" I pressed. "Half of what I was getting," she replied coolly. "And half of what Harold was getting." I stared at her, trying to piece it all together. "Wait, you said Harold was only involved because you seduced him, so why would Masterson demand anything from him?" Her expression faltered briefly, a flicker of something resembling shame, or maybe just irritation. Because Harold wasn't as innocent as he pretended, she admitted. He wasn't just helping me with zoning permits. He was skimming money from the developers, too. And you went along with it? Of course, she said matter-of-factly. But I didn't realize how much leverage Masterson would have over me. You mean he blackmailed you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She smiled, cold and unrepentant. Only the first time. After that, I realized he was vastly superior to Harold in certain ways. Vastly superior? I repeated, a knot of disgust forming in my stomach. She leaned back, her smirk widening. Let's just say everyone has their preferences, and I'd discovered mine. I stared at her, struggling to grasp how far she had fallen. So you're saying you didn't even mind that I hired Masterson? I asked, my tone laced with sarcasm. She chuckled, a low, humorless sound. No, actually, I think I owe you for that one. Her amusement faded, replaced by a sharp bitterness. Everything would have been fine if it hadn't been for those nosy neighbors on Magnolia Lane. If they hadn't called the police, none of this would have blown up. I smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile. For the first time in the entire conversation, I felt a sliver of satisfaction. Actually, Anne, it wasn't the neighbors, it was me. I'm the one who called the police, and I'm the one who tipped off Channel 9. Her face twisted with rage. You son of a witch! She screamed, springing to her feet so quickly that her chair crashed to the floor. She grabbed a heavy law book from a shelf behind her and flung it across the table. I ducked just in time, and the book slammed into the wall with a loud thud. Before she could escalate further, the door flew open, and her lawyer rushed in, grabbing her arm. Anne, stop it! Calm down! You can't do this! I straightened my posture and brushed imaginary dust off my sleeve. I'm sorry I can't be a character witness for your client, I said to the lawyer with mock politeness. Then, turning to Anne one last time, I added, Enjoy your time in jail, Cookie. With that, I walked out, leaving her yelling angrily behind me. Masterson eventually took a plea deal, admitting guilt to a reduced charge of attacking a police officer in exchange for testifying against Anne and Harold. His cooperation earned him a lighter sentence, but he permanently lost his private investigator's license. Harold, on the other hand, received a less severe punishment than Anne since he hadn't directly accepted bribes. However, his reputation was destroyed. He lost his job, his wife, and whatever dignity he had left. He quietly left town soon after. In my opinion, he got exactly what he deserved. I stayed away from Anne's trial. I no longer cared about her fate and didn't want any reminders of the chaos she had caused in my life. One day, though, as I sat in a cafe, a headline caught my eye in a nearby newspaper. It announced Anne's sentencing, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. Anne had been sentenced to 3 to 5 years in state prison and fined $25,000 for soliciting an illegal gratuity. But that wasn't the end of her troubles. The article revealed she was also facing federal charges for tax evasion tied to her secret cash fund. Apparently, the state seizing her illicit assets wasn't enough to satisfy the IRS. I set the paper down and leaned back in my chair, a strange sense of closure washing over me. Exactly what she deserves, I muttered under my breath. Maybe now I could finally move forward. As I savored that thought, a familiar voice broke through my reverie. Hey, stranger, can you buy a girl a cup of coffee? I looked up and smiled. I'd be delighted, Maria Elena.